allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you'd remain standing for a moment of silence, please.
Let us remember the 9 firefighters and 7 police officers that have died since our last board meeting.
Thank you. Okay, coming back out of executive session, we've been talking recently about capital improvement needs and specifically the needs at Station 4. We've got some significant challenges there as far as structurally, well, structurally probably be first, but there's a few things that the chief will enumerate as far as what's been going on there. So the board's been looking into what our options are and starting some planning phases of how we're going to make inroads on the changes that are needed to that station. So Chief, if you want to talk about the why we're looking, I guess is what we do first.
Sure. Board, as early as 2000, 2001, there's been communications within the district relating to station number 4, have being identified as needing repair or replacement. The functionality for that station, the apparatus that will fit or won't fit in that station, things like that have been a challenge. That station was mid-70s, I believe. It was actually put in place and then added on to and things like that. At one point, I believe it was actually the fire chief's home was part of the deal, so I'd like to renegotiate. And so with that, we fast forward to even 2007 when we had a citizens engagement committee that spoke to concerns and financial needs of the district, trying to get some prioritizations. At that time, new station in Uptown was placed at a priority number 4. Ironically, number 1 and number 3 are no longer issues on that priority list. They've been addressed. So I guess that bumps to a priority number 2 based upon a 2007, near 10 years ago discussion as it needed assistance and attention back then. We've certainly done work at the station and done some asbestos removal and things like that over the years. We're currently working on some problems on the site as it relates to where the fitness equipment is, things like that. So long story short is we need to do some long-range planning as it relates to station number 4. Ideally, a replacement of that station is in order. And at this time, we've done some work at your direction to find out if a station on the current site is feasible or not. And at this point, we do believe that there is a feasibility to outfit a station on that site and move forward with that as a direction. We'll talk about some funding issues as we go forward here the rest of the evening to discuss that. We're dealing with the architects with LEA just who've done some preliminary drawings just to see again if it would work, and it does. So we've got those drawings here for anyone to look at, and I'll pass these around or get them out there. There's some handouts on the board if anyone, or on the table if anyone wants to grab those. But there's a site plan which currently would allow the fire station in its current configuration, the parking lot as it currently sits. We're looking at some alternate options as it's designed here as it sits. And then we've got a first and second floor design. First floor here and a second floor here, basically sleeping quarters and things on the first floor, and then the training room and things like that on the second floor, day room and such. So it'll be a 2-story living quarters with a 1-story apparatus bay. But it's a very tight fit on a very small lot. But we think there's some feasibility for that. So we will continue at your direction, if so given, as a motion in an open meeting, to continue our investigation mode and feasibility of continuing what site work has been done and what our options are. The challenges are grade issues there, utility issues there. We've got a cell tower on site with 4 or 5 outbuildings on that site that all have to be kind of configured into this piece here. So complex, yes. Doable, most likely. And so we'll continue to do due diligence to find out what else we need to know about that site and get some cost estimates as we begin to move forward. Interestingly enough, the site that we currently have here is tight, as I said. It does not afford a spot for the Coconino County Sheriff, which is part of our land use agreement, if you will. So that really begs the question about station number 5, which is also on our radar. We'll talk a little bit about the bond issue again today, but station number 5 has been on our radar again for a long time. That was item number 2 on our 2007 hit list. And we've actually been in contact with the state parks and looking at potential options as it relates to Slide Rock State Park as an option. Again, just in the very early stages of that, but I think we have a responsibility in the district to find the best solution for providing effective emergency response. Our current locations, both of those, present incredible challenges to our workforce, both in response, in efficiencies. So we're looking at trying to find solutions to those almost every day. And so we've been working hard at that.
Station 4 and 5, neither of them were purpose-built as fire stations, is that correct?
Station 5 was built as a fire station, but not as a staffed fire station. It was built as a volunteer fire station, from my understanding, and correct me if anybody knows differently. Station 4, I don't know about Station 4. That was built as, it was a fire chief's house, like I said, at one point.
It was a converted house.
And then they added on to it, and they made it an actual working fire station. So whether there was apparatus there the whole time, I can't.
Yes, I believe there was.
Yes.
I would say yes.
So it's, but it's been added on and converted and done a few of its own. Station number 5 is actually owned, well, let's see, we own a third of the building, I think. And we occupy the rest of it on an agreement through the Garland Trust. So that station's got, kind of like the Brady Bunch with the tape down the room sort of thing. We own one bay and up above it, and the other part is owned by the Garland Trust. And so there's some complexities of old yesteryears that have worked, but we're trying to get those more in line with today's practices as well. So 2 things that are on our radar. Just want to put them out there for you and everyone else to hear. Long-term problems, or long-term solutions to a long-term problem, but also working towards solutions when they fit into the mold. And you'll hear some of our concerns going forward budget-wise.
Quick question, Chief. So it sounds like there have been deficiencies identified at Station 4 going back 16, 17 years.
That's correct.
And during that time, we've continued to grow as a community.
Yes.
And so does that mean then that you mentioned that it affects response times?
Yes.
So the health and safety then of our public is at risk.
So this current station number 4 is a 2-story fire station, which we're also proposing a 2-story station here, just based upon the constriction, the tight site. But the ability to navigate through station number 4 as it currently sits in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, there's a breakup of all the different bunk rooms and things like that. We've got a half flight of stairs that gets you up to another landing, to the day room and the kitchen area. The workout center's on the 2nd floor on a wood joist construction situation. We have a diesel exhaust system in the station, but there's still some concerns about how we stow some of our turnout gears and things like that to today's NFPA compliance issues in the station. So whole host of things that kind of all come into it. It's a back-end station and a lot of foot traffic there, so we've got safety concerns as it relates to that. Of course, the firefighters get out, we block traffic and everything, so we do a fairly good job of making sure it's safe, but today's standards, again, are typically a drive-through station to avoid backing, and so we try to avoid backing as much as possible.
Could you achieve that if you built on that site? Could you have a drive-through?
Our plans that you see here do achieve a drive-through station for 2 of the bays. I mean, they're all drive-throughs, but there's a tight turning radius, so there's a likelihood that like the battalion chief car may need to be backed in still, depending what we store there. But the engine and the ambulance would be able to do a drive-through configuration.
And Chief, in terms of going forward, we would be directing LEA to take a look at some of the issues of the grading, the towers,
Yeah,
to completely be sure that we can build on this site.
yes, with our current configuration as designed and then the consideration for if we could flip it, what that would do, it may actually provide us a better footprint and provide us some more of the space. There's a few things missing from this design currently that I think we can still overcome, but functionality wise, it's not perfect. But given the constraints that we have of the site, I think it works well. But there are grading issues, so would be the west, the north and the west it's a pretty high grade, probably 6-7 feet, I'm thinking, from the current parking lot to the lot next door. And so we gotta, bolster that. So right now there's a building that sits there. The annex building sits on part of that parcel. I know that we've had erosion issues, substantial erosion issues in the past recently, with some rains that have eaten away the bank and things like that, behind the annex building. So again, all things that I think are engineering possible. We just need to continue to work at it, and if so directed, we'll continue to work with LEA at this time for this, again, feasibility piece, and then decide how we want to proceed as we continue to go forward and further this project more so.
And give us a tighter cost range too.
Yes.
As the feasibility becomes clearer.
Absolutely, and the estimation of that is difficult to do because you don't know what the time frame of the build is, right? And we saw with some of our construction, even with the 9/11 memorial, at that time, the cost per square foot to do some of the concrete work was like twice, if I recall, what it cost to do in the station just a year prior. I mean, the square foot cost was twice by whatever the demand was at that time. So some of these, costs fluctuate and things like that. So it's hard to nail it down. So they usually give us a range, so much per square foot, but about a, 40 or 50% increase between the two ranges to give them enough leeway to really understand. So until we really get to the altar and begin to really get ready to take action, where we really know what we're really looking at, or when we open the bids, I guess technically, right? So all that is time dependent.
Any other comments? So I believe the consensus, I don't know that we need a motion, the consensus of the board is to proceed. Chief was instructed in exec session as far as strategy, and there's no motion, I don't think, required right now, but the board consensus is that we're gonna continue to move forward with options and planning for Station 4.
Just confirm you have the consensus.
Do I have the consensus?
Yes.
Do I have the consensus? Okay. So
Thank you.
that's the plan.
Please make sure you guys get a copy for those folks that might be interested. Copies are for everybody, and it's a draft copy, and
Certainly not final plans, just the
concept.
initial ideas.
maybe we should get a pen out, right? Concept on there.
All right. So we're going into budget workshop. Is that where we're going next?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm trying to pull my stuff up here. Budget workshop is up, and I will turn it over to Gabe.
All right. Mr. Chair, members of the board, good evening, happy new year. Saw some of you laughed at. So we're starting, well, I should say from my perspective, we're starting the budget process in some ways a little early, a little prematurely, because we still don't have a lot of our numbers. We do have, obviously the big one, which is PSPRS, and part of the reason why I did want us to kind of get started, along with the chief, wanted to get started on this discussion earlier rather than later, as well as there's a little difference in philosophies and methodologies in developing the budget between, Sandy and myself, and so also I wanted to kind of roll out some of the differences that you'll see as we go through this. But again, ultimately, this is what your job is. This is what you get paid the big bucks for, is to adopt this budget annually. So as I go through it, this is where I really would like the feedback from the board on direction and ideas. So as I work with the chief and the program managers, as we build this budget to present to you, we hopefully show up at that first meeting with a full budget, hopefully along the lines with the direction that the board would like us to go. So with that, kind of what are our objectives for this meeting? One, I want to go over a brief overview of our current year budget performance, where we're at, and, you know, kind of what that means for our budgeting process. I want to discuss the original projections for our FY 17-18 budget. By statute, as we develop a budget and the board adopts a budget, we're also required to project 2 years out. And so we had some projections. We thought things were going to go a certain way. We had some assumptions in there. And as we work through, you'll see, and I'll explain how some of those assumptions have changed, in some ways rather drastically. We want to talk about the knowns and what we're waiting on to find out. What are the financial goals for SFD? Where do we want this organization to go financially? And then just finally follow up with kind of timeline on the budget process. And so you're aware, and again, find out if there's some different direction that I'm going to get from you guys. So, starting off with the overview of our current budget performance. Last year, in June, I believe you guys did the final adoption. We had a net assessed value of $510,949. You adopted a budget with a tax rate of, or mill rate of $2.44.7 essentially. The property taxes were broken up into just over $3 million from Coconino County and just over $9 million from Yavapai County for a total tax levy of $12,502,000. We received and projected approximately $323,000 in FDAT revenues and non-tax levy revenues of $2.16 million. And then we projected a budgeted carryover or offset to the taxes of $862,000. And I want you to focus on that. We're going to talk about it in a minute, but I do want to talk about that number and how that number's been projected when we look at the projection budget. Wages and benefits were $11.6 million. The operating budget, which is our fleet expenses, our maintenance expenses, our telecommunication expenses, everything essentially other than capital and personnel, is $2.7 million. And the capital budget was $1.3 million, which included new capital as well as existing debt service on Station 6. From a performance standpoint, where we're at, and this is through December, our total revenue is just over $9 million at $9,012,168. We are $400,000 ahead of budget, but that is relative to the timing on our collection of tax levy revenue. And if you remember when I was first hired by the district, we discussed the concept of 12-month budgets versus annualized budgets divided by 12. Well, we're actually, on the revenue side, I did divide it into an actual true 12-month budget, and we are trending ahead of our historical collections. So that's why we are ahead by by 76% of that 400,000. So roughly about 300,000 of that is timing on tax levy revenue. And then roughly the other 80 to 100,000 is the non-levy revenues predominantly related to wildland revenue. So we are over, and we do anticipate ending ahead on the revenue side, mainly due to the wildland. But again, we are ahead of our projections on the tax levy. The expense side, our total expenses are under budget by $960,000. The total expenses are just over $7 million. And if we take that and we assume though that 6 months, at 6 months out, we're $900,000 to the good on expenses, well then the next 6 months, we should be another $900,000 at 1.8. But that's where the expense side of the budget was essentially taken the 15.8 million and just divided by 12. Because the budget wasn't developed with when these purchases are gonna occur. And talking with, Mr. Soto earlier, he's like, I'm looking at your report and I see that we're way over on capital. And that's again because we took the 1.3 million in capital expenses divided by 12, whereas saying that, you know what, we're gonna buy this engine in July and then reduce those variances. So, and the reason why we're ahead on the expense side though overall is because of our timing by design on when we make our expenses, because of tax levy revenue avoiding going onto the line of credit earlier in the year and waiting for our tax levy revenue to come in. So based on looking at our expenses and historical projections, I anticipate we will still come in under budget overall. But again, we're not gonna be this nice little, 1.8 million or even $1 million under budget, based on where we're looking at for the first 6 months. So any kind of questions on where we're at on that standpoint? Okay. So looking at the projected budget for next fiscal year, and this is as it was originally projected back in April of 2016. We had a projected increase in assessed value of 2% to $521,168,000. A projected tax rate of $2.53. And as you can see, the prospective breakout on the tax collections for a total of $13,195,000. FDAT remained at the $323,000. Non-levy revenues increased slightly to $2.2 million. But then here we've plugged in that we're going to have $704,000 of carryover reserve. And this is where, in my line of work, I get nervous about budgets being based off of these kind of numbers. Because what we're saying is we're basing our budget and our future projections off of a surplus in this current fiscal year. So what happens when we don't have a surplus this year, or we even have a budget deficit? We've done no planning in our expenditures to account for that. And so as we go through the budget process, one of the things that I want to do, and if I look back historically, the district historically has had surpluses year over year. So to me, that tells me there's something in the budgeting process that we're over budgeting at budget time, or we're under budgeting on the revenue side at budget time, and constantly seeing these large surpluses. So what I would like to do is narrow that down and develop the budget based on what the true expenses are. And if we do have a surplus, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, what we need to do and look at from a fund balance perspective. And then finally, we've got our expenses. So we have wages and benefits at $12.4 million. That reflects a PSPS contribution rate of 25.1%. So we know we did not hit that mark. We'll talk about what rate is actually it's actually at. There's a projected cost of living increase of 0.75%. An increase to the paramedic stipend of $2.50 to go in effect January 1 of 2018. Projected increase in healthcare of 15%. Projected increase in workers' comp of 14%. And then the capital expenditures listed below there. Type 1 engine, an ambulance remount, a microwave system replacement, EPCR and RMS upgrades, thermal imaging camera, a new fire hose, and then obviously our existing debt service on Station 6.
And so the COLA, to be clear, that's a placeholder that we put in there, not knowing where the COLA would be, but to have
Right.
something in there as a placeholder. Nothing's been discussed or determined as a COLA, strictly just a placeholder for when.
So by having these surpluses every year, sorry, I'm back 3 steps.
Yes, no, yes.
By having the surplus, are we creating an artificially low budget?
Yes.
I mean, the
Or-
money's getting rolled back in,
Or,
but
yeah,
it's just, we're just kicking it down 1 year to 1 year.
exactly.
So the true cost of our budget is higher than we're actually showing, because we're
Correct.
using surplus from the prior year.
Correct.
And with the surplus, it could be overestimating what our costs are. But I've also observed year after year, since being on the board, that savings have occurred during the year too, that
Right.
have created, and extra income as
Right.
well, that have created that surplus.
Which is fine, which I think is in order to effectively manage an organization, we have to be looking at, okay, we think it's gonna cost us, X amount of dollars to purchase something during the year. And, Pat did a great job, and we've got a grant in, and so now we don't have to expend that money, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is, when I see that number in projections, it means we're planning on always having extra money. And why are we always planning on having extra money? We shouldn't be, we should be either allocating those dollars to something, or tightening up our methodology and our budget if we always think we're gonna have extra money. So, and there's gotta be contingencies built in as well. I mean, you can't develop a budget that's so tight that any slight variance and it could throw you way over your budget. So there's gotta be some contingencies built in, but when I'm looking at the size of the numbers that seems to historically occur, it's higher than I would like to see. And here in a minute, we're gonna talk about kind of what what we think we should do, and where also too, I recommend that we should go with some of this stuff, so.
And Gabe, on the healthcare increase at 15%, how
Yes.
did you come to that?
So that's that was built last year in the April
Okay.
budget, but I will say from what I'm hearing in the marketplace is most places are seeing anywhere from 10 to 15% increase in health insurance. Betty did get some new information that sounds like ours is going to probably be around the 7 to 7.5% increase. So,
That's what I thought.
so
So we could reduce that.
right, and same thing with workers' comp. And so, if there's no more questions on kind of what we thought things were going to be, I want to go into what we now know.
So just an artificially low question, Chairman Montgomery. So we've elected to use that offset to help reduce the tax levy, to lower the mill rate or keep the mill rate pacing the mill rate. That means, so make sure.
Right,
that
but,
comment-
but my question is, if you true up the budget is higher than what we present each year.
No, the budget's the budget. That's
If
what
you,
we-
but you're using a
But
surplus
you're using
from
a
the
higher
prior
number.
year to make this, if I've got 800,000, my budget is 16 million, he's saying you can't count on having that 800,000, so truly your budget is 16.8 million. We just happen to have a surplus that we're keeping from year to year, cause you're planning on it every year.
That's not.
I think it's the flip of that, actually. I apologize. So if we're budgeting, if we're saying our budget's 16 million, but we've pushed over 800,000 from last year, so really we're only receiving new revenue of 17.2 million. But then we're saying next year we're gonna have 800,000 of carryover as well. That means we're gonna pull in 800,000 more, and then keep pushing that forward.
We're bound by this, the 16 or 15,854 in the last budget, and that, we can't spend a penny more than that by law. So that 800,000 doesn't make us be able to spend 16.6. It's 15.8. The 800,000 reduced the amount of levy that we levied.
So
That offset the levy.
it's artificially high, almost.
Okay.
Now,
Not
carry
artif-
over 800,000 every year, is it artificially high, or could we not spend as much?
Right.
There's some functionality in that budget, so if we have a $400,000 contingency every year that we allocate, and we end up spending 100,000 of that we end up carrying over, there's 300,000 gonna get carried over regardless, cause that was a contingency was not spent. And if we bring in another $100,000 in wildland revenue, now we're at $400,000 being, access carried over, if you will. If we didn't spend every dime in payroll or whatever else it was, I mean, that money gets carried over, and if some project didn't get completed that we try to do, that money gets carried over. It's just the $800,000, that the difference is we've been borrowing from the savings account, if you will, to offset and smooth. Remember the bridge discussions we've had? We talked about creating this bridge to try not to go from this tax levy to this tax levy, and we've been trying to build this slow, steady process, and that's what that $800,000 has been helping do, is helping get us there, and so we've been diminishing that. That number's been higher in the past, and we've been trying to whittle that down so that the tax rate and the expenses come together. That was the intent.
And I've got some fund balance trending to show you where those periods of time where literally the money was truly taken from fund balance to lower the levy, but then you could also see where it's essentially where also it started to increase, meaning we're still seeing surpluses above and beyond the 800,000 that we're plugging in, so.
But your concept, we should not be plugging in surpluses as a plan for budget year.
Exactly,
Okay, so
exactly.
We'll start there. Got it. Notwithstanding the whole debit credit thing, and it makes my head spin a little bit,
Yeah.
but,
Debits are good on one side of it, not on the other.
right.
Yes. Okay, so what we know, what we need to know, what we will know. So we assess value, which really is the biggest drive for the next steps in the budget, should come by February 10th to February 15th. So kind of early to mid-February, we should have the assessed value number, so we can plug that in and really begin getting into this the budget and looking at more true numbers. We do have the ambulance general rate increase, which actually today we got the notice of the substantive questions. So that's where they ask all the detailed questions behind all the numbers. But we anticipate that obviously being in full effect by July 1. So we can anticipate an additional 100,000 in ambulance revenue, depending on statutory changes on access or Medicare reimbursement changes. But the biggest reason why we're here today talking about this so early is the PSPRS contribution rate going from, we assumed 25.1%, and we went to 34.85%. So it's a 41% increase year over year, but 34.85 percentage points of contribution, which is $590,000 more than what the projection was that I just showed you, but it's 660,000 over what we're paying this year for PSPRS. Which the impact to this tax rate that I showed you a second ago of $2.53 to absorb that in the levy is 11.33.
So very common, that percentage is Sedona centric, meaning it is relative to us. So neighboring towns may have seen something less than, and some saw more than us. But as a general statement, we're kind of par 40%-ish increases, whereas 30 to 40 to 50% increases is what people, other agencies are seeing. So that's not, it's a product of the PSPRS system and has nothing to do, and I say nothing, we're Sedona, so we have something to do with it, but it's not that we did or didn't do something to create that. It's some legislative stuff, which Gabe will talk about in a second, and things like that, but this is a $220 million impact to public safety pensions to the state of Arizona. We're just 660 of it.
So we have that issue that's arose, and also the Hall decision. We found out both at AFTA and at the AFTA board meeting the first of the month that PSPRS is saying that the organizations are going to have to pay out the reimbursement to the employees on the PSPRS contributions due to the Hall decision. So at the end of this fiscal year, Sedona's liability is estimated to be at $1 million. Now, what PSPRS says they're going to do is offset our PSPRS costs for next year. So credit us for what our PSPRS costs are for next year, which is roughly about $1 million. The problem is depending on how the payout's determined, we may have to pay out that $1 million at the beginning of the year, which will lead into my conversation here in a minute about fund balance and where we need to be, based not only on this kind of stuff, but just overall best practices.
So just to be clear, Gabe, you're saying that it'll be a certain amount of offset, but that we will have to pay it off all at once is the difference.
We don't know. All they have told us is, based on IRS regulations, and this is accurate, because it was withheld pre-tax dollars, it has to go back to the employee the same way. So it either has to go to them through a 1099-R as a distribution from their retirement, which would cause 10% penalty on those individuals that are under 59 and a half. So that's not going to work. So the other option is to reimburse it back through salaries, through payroll, where the district will come in and have to pay that money back. It's not been determined how we have to do it, if we can split it up into two payments, when it has to be done by. All we know is what the liability is, what it will continue to grow to, and that there's interest on this balance as well until it's paid. PSPRS will cover the district from a credit standpoint on their PSPRS contributions for that year, is what they're telling us right now. We'll see if, as they work through the process, if that changes, but right now, preliminarily, that's what we're being told. So we have to start kind of gearing up and preparing for that possibility. Workers' comp, so based on, we had that 15% increase in there, but we actually are anticipating a decrease from that number, for not a total dollar decrease, but decrease from that 14% for next fiscal year. But then we're going to see significant increases the following year. And the chief and everybody I know has already started working on the workers' comp pool to help level out our workers' comp costs year over year. But again, that increase in workers' comp is only about $50,000. So although it does add up, when we look at some of the big picture and some of the impacts that we're seeing already, it helps, but it's a little bit of help. And then I just already mentioned health insurance. The market projections are around 10 to 15%, but based on what Betty told me this morning, some of our cost neutralizers, we should actually only see around the 7 to 7.5%. So again, that's another $100,000 in savings based off of those projections. So it's not all bad. There's some good news in there, but it is definitely going to be a challenging budget season for districts around the state. Any questions on some of these figures and facts? So with that, kind of what do we want to do? What do we want? What type of organization does Sedona Fire want to be? There's organizations out there that want to just put their nose to the ground and look at the budget year, look at the statutory 2 years forward and move on. Or do we want to be an organization that ensures its long-term financial stability and responsibleness from your perspective to your taxpayers, to the citizens you serve, and the employees of the district. As I look at more and more things, there's things we can do to better our position and things we can do to help address some of these trends that we're seeing throughout the state and throughout the country. One of the areas that we can curb some of these impacts is the growth of our fund balance. Here in a few slides, I'm going to show you kind of what the fund balance of Sedona Fire has been over the years and where it rose to and where it's come down to. A strong fund balance is important for many things, and the Government Finance Officers Association actually recommends fund balances based on certain criteria. Some of that being the volatility of the organization's income and expenses, considering that we're stuck with assessed value increases or decreases. We have Prop 117 that limits our ability to see increases in assessed value, but no floor on the decreases in assessed value. We have our expenses that, as we've seen this year with PSPRS, could increase exponentially year over year. We've got some volatility in those areas. We also want to look at what are the needs of the funds or the draw of the funds of the unrestricted fund balance to cover other funds. And the policy of budgeting dollars to pay for capital in the year we're buying it is drawing on our unreserved fund balance to fund capital, whether it's through the levy or whether it's through that fund balance we have by not having a large capital account. And then also it's what the elected officials say. I recommend, and it's roughly 20% of our budget, that we should have in unrestricted funds, which will allow us to, one, not only have enough funds to carry us through the lean times of year based on our cash flows, also allow us to absorb these changes that we're seeing, as well as any market corrections that economists anticipate we'll see in fiscal year 19 and 20. So we can't grow it overnight. It's a process, and it's a process that I'd like this board and this organization to look at and start working on it. And we'll talk about what those numbers look like here in a minute. And then finally, the other piece to look at is other funding sources. We know that we have a cap on our tax rate for the operations. And I'm not going to get too far into this because this is what Mike Laval's here for to discuss with you after this. But there is the potential of going for bonding for our larger capital purchases and thereby eliminating the need for our operating budget or our operating levy rate to fund our major capital expenses, which the biggest thing that gives us is more capacity. Because although today we're not, we're at $2.44, so we're not at the 325, but we are less than $1 from the 325. And as we work on projections and as we get numbers, we'll work through when we hit that point. Because as you're going to see in a minute as well, our expenses or our revenues and our levy is increasing at a rate faster than our assessed value is growing. So we will, if we stay on our current path, we will hit that point. And based on Prop 117, it's gonna take us 10 years to get back to where we even were. And that's best case scenario if we saw 5% growth year over year, which we haven't seen yet. And then really, on the bond side, the cons is the political capital aspect of it. I mean, there's a lot of good things with the bonds. It allows you to pay for the debt, pay for your assets over their useful life, or versus, levying $500,000 for a new truck today and then paying cash for it. This allows us to pay for it over its useful life. But there is a large amount of political capital that needs to be expended on that. And that's for you and everyone, from the public to the board to decide on the benefits of that. So, yes.
As we look back to past practice and we look to how PSPRS has been handled, my sense is that it hasn't been an issue of how the management issues. It's just been a process piece that's been carried on and adapted over time. Nothing that would be out of line with that, correct?
Right, correct.
And the PSPRS piece is just a function of just the state's return system for the public safety
Right.
employees, not the Sedona Fire District's management of those funds.
Correct, and I think that's Chief Patriot, that's important to say is all of this that we're seeing is not functions of poor management. This is functions of outside economic conditions that are affecting fire districts as a whole. And so we're seeing costs increase that we don't have control over, and we're seeing our revenue affected by factors that we don't have control over. And so what that's doing is that's putting us into a position where we have to, I think you said it best earlier, look at the business model and look at different ways that we could do things differently and do things more efficiently. Look at stuff like the bond, look at other ways of doing things to help kind of curb what's impacting us outside of the management of this organization. So here are those trends that I was mentioning, and the blue bar represents our assessed value starting in fiscal year 2008, going through fiscal year 2017, and then the red line is our levy. And as you can see, for the first couple of years on this graph, the levy actually fluctuated almost in line or inversely with our assessed value. And then as our assessed value started to decrease, the levy decreased to where it leveled off. But then starting fiscal year 14, we now start growing our levy at a rate faster than our assessed value is increasing. And we did that by raising the tax rate. And so the only way we're going to be able to keep up with this pace is by continuing to raise that tax rate and eventually hitting that cap. When we hit that cap, we're then now at the mercy of our assessed value to determine any kind of planning.
Gabe, just to provide some history.
Yeah.
In the years where the levy was falling even more than the assessed valuation, there was a false sense because savings was being used to put into the budget so that the levy actually got lowered because savings that was meant for something else, like a fire station, instead was put into the budget. So we've been playing catch up here, and that's why it's been rising higher.
Right.
I don't think that we're projected to continue at that rate of rise. That's my question to you. I wouldn't want you to assume that because we had to rise between the year 2013 and up to 16 that we're on that kind of projection. We've been catching up from it being artificially lowered.
Well, and up until PSPRS numbers came out, I would say that's mainly true. But now that we've got this impact, and I hate to keep harping on this, but this is why we're talking right now. Until we saw that impact, that trend switched to where it is continuing at this quicker rate.
Okay.
And one of the things that I have not done yet that we're going to work on as we go through the budget process is working on the methodology on our long-term projections and tying down those numbers and getting more accurate long-term projections. So we've got a better picture of where we're going in the timeline that's going to take us to get there.
Gabe, quick question.
Yes.
Ideally, do you wanna see the red line and the blue bars track each other?
Right. Well, not necessarily, because, well, actually, yes, as far as growth goes. But if there's a dip in assessed value, it would actually be okay to see that red line even stay neutral, because we have unrestricted fund balance to bridge that gap if we know it's a short-term gap. You know, there is value in spending the savings, if you know it's a short-term thing and you know how much you're gonna spend. And the next slide, you're gonna see how much we spend and how detrimentally low we've taken our fund balance to where, you know, this year, for example, at one point, we had $100,000 in our account. You know, so an organization with, you know, a $15 million budget and 94 employees, although we do have a line of credit to back us up, shouldn't have $100,000 in the bank account. None of us would, on percentage-wise, or I should say probably most of us on a percentage-wise, wouldn't run our own personal finances like that. Because then you're relying on debt instruments, and you're relying on something else to take care of you instead of planning. And finally, what that takes us to is that fund balance. And as Corey mentioned, you can see right there, we went from 6.9 million to 3.6 million. So that's where we saw that kind of level. We're just gonna pull money out of savings to balance the budget. And then as we look at the more recent years, you'll see we've gone from 3.6 to 4.3 to 4.8. But realize, based on the budgeting that's been done, our budget is balanced in this fiscal year because of that 4.8 million. We said $800,000 is gonna go to balance our budget. And then we said next year, $700,000 is gonna go to balance our budget. And so if we don't hit that mark, if we don't see that surplus, we've now fully reduced our fund balance. And that's where, going back to where my concern is more, not necessarily with, there is the concern that there's some over budgeting or under budgeting occurring, but that what happens in that year that we don't have the excess. And then going back to, you know, fund balance recommendation is with a $15 million budget, we've got 4.8 million. 800,000 is taken away to fund the next year's budget. So we have 4 million. This board has said they want $2 million of restricted funds, that we keep a base balance of $2 million. Then that leaves us an additional 2 million of unrestricted funds. When going back to that roughly 20%, we should really have 3 million. So we're essentially, from where the government finance officer's recommendations are versus where we're at, we're about $1 million gap, which is a big number, but it's a feasible number if we plan. And we spent some time today with labor and had a good conversation on things we can do and how we can work on slowly transitioning at the will of the board on reaching that goal. And I have to say, I mean, myself and the rest of the organization, I mean, everybody's committed to this organization, and this is something I want to change that trend line on our fund balance, that black line there, from a negative trend line to at least a neutral or slightly increasing, because realize as our budget increases, that need for reserve funds increases as well. I've given you guys some thoughts. I've given you guys my recommendations and opinions, and I think this is a time where I'd really like to hear from the board what your thoughts are, what your feelings are on these concepts.
I think it sure makes sense to have a higher percentage in unrestricted funds available to us. And if you're recommending 20% as a standard, it makes sense for us to take that seriously.
Board, if you recall that in the past, through the GOFA, it was a 15% policy that you had in place a couple of years ago, for many years. And just due to, again, to some constrictures, we wanted to try to free up some space and make the world go round. And we went to a $2 million cap. We're not too far off where your 15% was aggregately now. We're over that, obviously, you see it. But so we need to make sure we're talking apple and the apple here as to what what that $2 million is for? So Gabe can understand that exactly. Is that, you know, that the rainy day fund, or is the 15%, the $3 million that we're trying to aim for, is that the rainy day fund? The $2 million is, you know, the rainy day fund, or is that the, you know, where does it fit? Certainly as the budget goes up, and before we were getting paid so quickly in wildland, we were down to you know, a very small number that made us all very uncomfortable. We're now getting paid much quicker on wildland, so that's really helping a ton. But that doesn't mean we're too far away from being concerned on where that is. But having that, you know, what is essentially $4 million right now in reserves, $2 million being board contingency and kind of swept aside. We utilize that fund, right, when we're paying bills and things, that we use that money. It just gets put back throughout the year as taxes come in and stuff. How do we want to get to, you know, that would be, again, I guess it'd be a $5 million fund balance and then beyond.
And the concern is, I would assume in order to get there, the mill rate goes up a bit.
Well, I wouldn't quite necessarily advocate that yet. I think if we get the direction that that's something the board wants to do as we work through the budget process, we'll find ways to create, you know, one, the balanced budget with the projections, but then also emphasize on the savings and different things to work on getting there. So, I mean, I'm not proposing that we raise taxes to get up to the $1 million tomorrow, but we'll look at all the different variables and see where we can save to increase that fund balance.
Gabe, just, I'm trying to make sense of all this, but do you think it's realistic with the budget challenges that you've identified and that the chief has identified over the next couple of years? Is it really realistic to think that we can grow the fund balance during that period of time without raising?
I think we have to find ways to do it if we want to ensure that stability. So there's we have to be creative, and we have to look at our revenue sources. We have to look at our expenditures, and we have to, if there is a slight increase, we have to look at taking some of that. But again, we really need to dive into the numbers more and find out where that money can come from. And some of it could come from that in the historically projected surpluses.
Yeah, historically, one of the problems was that if you see they were up to 7 million at
Right.
one point, and that was on a budget of probably 12 or 13 at that
Right.
time.
Right.
Right. But that money that had been set aside was supposed to be used for capital improvements, and it wasn't. It was used to artificially reduce tax levy,
Right.
as you know. And so now we're looking at how we're going to pay for capital improvements when things were changed. So I certainly don't want to be back in a position where we have $7 million of taxpayer, or 50% of our annual budget in taxpayer money sitting in the bank. That's not.
I completely agree.
So
Right. It's a balance.
Right,
It definitely is.
We have to find a number that moves with our budget. If it's 15% as opposed to 2 million, I think that makes more sense because the budget could change. And as opposed to picking an arbitrary number, that makes more sense.
Right.
And just to have a plan, other than suddenly there's 7 million in the bank and the board's going, oh, what do you want to do with that money? That was not appropriately done, I don't.
Right.
Let me know if that happens.
Yeah, if that happens,
That doesn't seem
that'll
real
be a fun
plausible.
board meeting, but I'm not anticipating that will happen.
And board, as I recall, we talked about going to the $2 million instead of 15% as a stopgap, short term, and need to revisit this as we go along, and whether we go back to a percent or whether we go back to a number. Hey, it's 200 or 2 million now. We need to go to 2.1 or 2.3, or and kind of get back up to that level. But we've been trying to play again, bridge that piece there, and that was kind of the philosophy anyway. So just trying to refresh some memories there, that there was talk about 2 million is not the number forever by any means.
And it is, you're exactly right. It's going to be a balance. It's having 50% of your budget in reserves without a cleared out capital improvement plan, because if there's a cleared laid out capital improvement plan, that may make sense, because in 2015 they may plan to spend 4 million of it, but without a plan, and that's the other thing, is depending on what direction and what happens with a bond, we also need to look at our capital and look at developing a capital improvement plan that's based upon scheduled funding into a capital fund that then pays out as replacements come versus the ebb and flow of, oh, we got to buy an engine this year. Oh, now we'll have to buy an ambulance next year. And this year we got to buy 2 engines. And so you're also having that constant fluctuation occurring as well in the levy that we, I believe, can smooth out and have a more efficiently run capital replacement program. So,
Okay. All right, thank you, Gabe.
thank you. Last piece on this is kind of scheduling for the budget. I'm requesting that program managers have budget requests submitted to finance by February 24th. We'll be giving them kind of their historical budgets, historical actuals, and a budget worksheet to fill out and get in. Then February through March, meeting with them to discuss the items and really get the priorities laid out. And then also in that period of time, we should get the numbers from the county on our assessed values. And then March 15th, so no workshop in February because we really won't have much more information than what we have today, is by the March 15th meeting, have a budget presented to the board that includes our assessed value. And obviously, if we have the number at the February meeting, we'll tell you what it is. But instead of having a workshop at that time, wait till the March meeting, have a workshop where we lay out, okay, here's our assessed values numbers, here's the expenses and the operational needs of the district. We still won't have firm numbers on health insurance or workers' comp or commercial, but as we get closer to when we'll get those firm numbers, we'll have a better idea on estimates and have those built into the budget. And then after that March board meeting, after we get some more direction from the board, spend that kind of March through May time period firming up those numbers as more stuff comes in. April 19th, do another board workshop with the board on any changes, any more numbers that we've received. And then by the May board meeting, have a board workshop followed by a tentative adoption, hopeful tentative adoption of the budget. And then June, hold the public hearing on the budget and final adoption. Does that work for the board? Okay.
All right.
Sure works for me.
Yep,
All right. Thank you very much.
thank
All right, thanks, Gabe.
No questions?
Well, I'm sure there'll be plenty as we go along. Don't worry.
You said that was your last opportunity.
Okay. So moving into the regular meeting consent agenda, I'll just make the motion to approve the board meeting minutes and the executive session minutes from December 14th, 2016 meeting.
Second?
Okay, discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Yeah, we had the bond presentation as well, sir. We need to, we can go back to it if you like.
Oh,
but-
with Geo bond, all right.
So what
It's
we
okay, we got A done, we can go back now. I'm sorry. Gabe, you wanna introduce him, or Chris?
I'll let Gabe start and, yeah.
Okay, so this is Mike Laval from Stifel. He's an investment banker. Their firm has represented pretty much every district in the state on bonds and overrides. And I've worked with them at Sun City, who just went for a bond this past election cycle. And so he's here today to discuss the bond process, how it works, and Chief, you have anything else to add to that?
I do not.
I'm gonna start with that one, all right?
Good evening.
Good evening.
How'd you get to full screen?
My technology working here.
How'd you do that before last time? I'll let you figure that out. All right.
There we go. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for the record, my name is Mike Lavalley. I'm with Stifel. My colleagues and I, we are Stifel's headquartered in St. Louis, but the group that's been doing business in Arizona for 30 plus years involves Grant Hamill, Mark Reeder, Tim Ernster, you're probably aware of Mark, I think you worked with him. Bob Casillas, myself, Mike Lavalley, Brian Lundberg are the managing directors, and we have a staff of about 12 to 15 of us that focus solely on Arizona. But our firm is nationwide. We're in a lot of the key market areas and doing this kind of work all across the country. Here in Arizona, we work with cities and towns, state agencies,
special districts, such as fire districts, K-12. K-12, we work with, I don't know, 80+% of the school districts in the state, including Sedona School District. My colleague Bob Casillas works with them. I do a lot of Yavapai County work myself, Prescott Unified, Chino Valley Fire District, Chino Valley Unified, Humboldt Unified. I'm all over Yavapai County myself. And then, but we basically cover anybody that borrows or needs to borrow, needs to talk about elections, is looking into an override. We can assist in many different ways with municipalities. So this evening normally I bring one presentation, but I just gave a presentation with my colleague Brian Lumberg at the Arizona Fire District Association conference. I don't know if anybody was in the room, the board. Oh, Tim, you were there, okay. Okay, I know Chief was. Good, so I'm gonna apologize, it'll be a lot of the same for the first part of it. I'm gonna deviate from that presentation when I get to the Daisy Mountain example, because I'll go right into the Sedona Fire District specific numbers for you. So I'm gonna kinda finish about halfway and then go over to some specific numbers related to Sedona Fire District, so you can kinda see tax impacts related to various sizes of bond elections. So I think what I ran was a $10 million bond, 12.5 million, 15 million, or 20 million, and what the tax impact might look like for any of those scenarios for Sedona Fire District. So, if I may, I will go to the first section. Just to touch on the fire districts across the state, I think since 2004, I mean, there's been north of $150 million of bonds asked for. I think it's up to $170 million since 2004 there, Arizona City Fire. Our firm has served most of them. I want to say all of them but one. And, you know, I think on this sheet what we wanted to point out was fire districts, while you don't want to take it for granted, but public safety issues are very popular at the polls. You'll see that Northwest Fire, for instance, Sun City, the top three, Summit, all passed their bonds almost either north of 60% up to a supermajority vote. A lot of them are supermajority votes here. You remember, it only takes 50% plus one vote to pass. Just to kind of compare, school districts that do GO bonds are very similar to fire district GO bonds. School districts, when they pass bonds, I mean, they are rarely ever in the 60% range. They're usually in the low 50s, 51, 52, 53% range. Public safety tends to outperform even public schools in terms at the voting box. Now, every community is different, and it takes quite a bit of work from many parties, including a citizens committee or a pro bond committee and whatnot, if you were to go down the road on an election, to actually get the word out, explain the needs. You know, why do you need these bonds? You know, the tax impact, things of that nature, so the community can feel comfortable that, you know, you're asking for things that are needed, not a whole bunch of wish list items. The tax impact, you know, what does this mean to my home, and what does this mean to my taxes, and so that you're explaining it correctly, so that when they go to the polls, they can make an educated decision. With that, this just goes into those same fire district questions, just in what years. So you see in 04, 06 there were 3, 07, 08. This is where the bulk of them were before, obviously in 08 when Lehman Brothers failed and the recession started to hit in 09, 10, 11 through 13, 14. Not a lot of fire district elections. Avra Valley, I believe, was in 12. I worked with them on that one. That one passed. And in 08, I did want to point out, even in 08, at the height, right when Lehman Brothers, and when everything was tearing apart economically, Two-Back Fire had their bonds on the ballot, and their percentage pass rate was almost 58%. And I'm sure it probably would have been in the mid-60s. I'm just speculating, had there just been a normal economy. But again, we were right in the middle of. But again, their bonds passed as well. 15, 16, again, we just had 3 pass in 16, and then Daisy Mountain was in 15. All passed successfully. Let's see here. This slide, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but this is not fire district experience. This is election history for school districts. Fire districts are GO bonds, are very similar to school district GO bonds, which we call Class B bonds for school districts. The far right column, you'll see the past success rate for, gives us a more solid history over the last, since 1999, we were running at a clip of the 90% success rate for school bonds until the recession time period. Then we were in the roughly 78% between the years of 2009 and 13. And then back, to the last 2-3 years, we're back up to 85% on bonds. Just to also point out, overrides for school districts, you can see the overrides that passed. The range was mostly, 70% success. Not as good as the bonds. If you compare them year to year or era to era, bonds outperform overrides. The only thing I can think of to explain that is folks tend to understand bonds. It's kind of like buying a home mortgage. I mean, they kind of understand you're borrowing money to build buildings, repaid over a number of years. Versus overrides. Overrides are a little more difficult to convey to your community. The word override itself makes it sound like, I think this was designed by the legislature, but it makes it sound like you can't live within your budget and you have to override your budget to get more money. So having to overcome just that word override and sell it to the community is very difficult. And we just show these stats. Schools, just like fire districts, are very hard up in getting state funding. It's very difficult, and so oftentimes overrides are the only thing they can go for, and then bonds for capital. The overrides are mostly for operational use. But I do know that overrides are available to fire districts these days, and so just wanted to kind of give you a history. Depending on the local community, bonds versus overrides. Bonds typically pass at a higher rate than overrides, but you can pass an override and a bond at the same time. Not that you're going to do that, but schools sometimes go for bonds and overrides at the same time. Usually overrides will pass at a lower rate. Again, or sometimes the override will fail and the bonds will pass. Just to speak about timing related to elections. This is not Yavapai County. We don't have Yavapai counties just yet, but this is just more of a generic timeline. Right now it's for Maricopa County. Every county has a different timeline. In terms of when you need to call for the election, statutorily, I think it's the first week of August. That's the drop dead deadline. But every county moves that deadline up depending on the county. Most counties outside of Maricopa County allow you to call for the election at your July board meeting. But I would suggest, Maricopa County doesn't allow that. They have so many things on the ballot. Usually you have to call it by the first week of June. My recommendation would be to consider, if you were to go forward with an election, you were to plan for this, to call for it sometime no later than mid to late June. July is very difficult with board member vacations, 4th of July, you got conferences, there's a lot of stuff going on in July. It makes it difficult to call for it and then, get things finished after that. You can certainly do it, just, I believe, as long as we call Yavapai County and get the calendar. The chief will, with permission going forward, will have to connect with the county and get their menu of services and their election timing and things of that nature. But generally speaking, calling for it, meaning the legal document that would come before you, let's say at a time in June, would be, we and the staff or a citizens committee would come before you and say, we recommend that the board calls for an election not to exceed, throw out a number, 15 million, and that resolution will have all the legalese in there that allows you to move forward towards calling for an election. It'll actually have the ballot question in there as well. One other thing I'll point out here, after the election is called for, if you do call for it, there is a process to put together a voter pamphlet, and unlike cities and towns and every other municipal entity in the state, any other municipal entity in the state is required, if you're doing a bond election, to actually have a voter pamphlet. Fire districts are not required, it's optional. So you'll have to decide, as a district, do you want to, incur the cost to send out a voter pamphlet? The voter pamphlet is more of a fact-based, legalese, has all the lawyer language in there. The ballot question's in there. There's some helpful stuff in there, but, it's 20 pages long and people, it's black and white, so it comes in your mail. You'll have to decide, do you want to send one to every registered voter? There is a cost associated with that. Some fire districts have chosen, no, we're not going to do that, and others have decided to do it. And it hasn't really affected, obviously the outcomes, because every fire district so far has passed an election in the last 10, 15 years. But Daisy Mountain, for instance, did not do a voter pamphlet. They just chose to, we know our community, we will get the message out. We're gonna have public forums. Our citizens committee will get the word out. We're gonna go door to door, hand out literature, things of that nature. And so there was an opportunity for public forums, for people who may have been against it to actually speak as well. And so they actually decided to go through that process and then avoid having the voter pamphlet. So that is but if you do decide to do a voter pamphlet, then you do have to, as part of that process, you have to advertise in the local paper for pro and con arguments. So pro arguments will come in, maybe from members of the board and others, but then con arguments will also come in. So if you publish a voter pamphlet, there will be pro and con arguments in there as well, or at least the opportunity for people to submit. More importantly than that, those deadlines, those statutory deadlines, is why I'm here today and here in January, is sort of the before June. This is the time to be talking to folks like us, here in the next month or two, engaging a bond attorney to help with the legal language. If you decide to go forward, they'll draft the resolution. We'll actually help drop the financial numbers into the resolution. Also, if you work with an architect or a project manager to help do facilities reviews or come up with really solid estimates for the facilities that you're thinking about bonding for, they can help. That entity can help speak in front of you and present. Here's the list of all the projects of the district, and here's our estimated price tags for each of those. And they will look at a lot of things, including inflation, because if you're, when you call for an election, let's say you call for 15 million, you could be spending 10 million in the first bond sale in March of 18, and then coming back 3 years later and selling another 5 million for the remaining projects. You may have a priority A project list and a priority B. Well, the priority Bs, if you're 3 or 4 years down the road, you really want to make sure you factor in inflation, just a little bit more in contingency, because you don't want to be short on your projects. You've asked the voters to approve these projects, and then to find out that you're short 3 or 4 years down the road is not good, because then you don't get to fund your projects. So hiring different professionals here in January and February is key. Also, organizing here in February an educating and advisory committee, members of the community, labor, and other folks that are would join it. Maybe a member or two of the board. That committee would then review the facilities needs, review information that we present, numbers, and be in a position to come the time of the board meeting to call for the resolution. Hopefully they would be the one saying, our citizens committee has determined it is necessary that we would ask you to move forward on an election. And here's why, and here's the amount. And so then they can make the recommendation in addition to staff on the day of the call for the election. So so between now and say May, there's a lot of behind the scenes work in terms of finding the facilities, the costing, working with the citizens committee, getting ideas and meeting with the board from time to time and getting your feedback. So this is a sort of an iterative process until the call for the election in June or July, whatever date you set, which doesn't that meets the county parameters. All right, so that's timing. I'm going to go into briefly. I'm not going to go through all these sections. You have these for you, but if you're unfamiliar with bonds, just generally speaking, GO bonds are, it's an IOU in its simplest terms. You borrow money with a promise to repay it over time. So in the sense of a general obligation bond, if the voters if you pass the election at 15 million and you decide to do a $10 million bond sale, you're going to underwrite the bonds through an underwriting firm such as ourselves in the spring, for instance, of 2018, and the 10 million will be offered to many investors, whoever buys bonds in Arizona. And they're going to look at it and decide, do I want to buy Sedona Fire District bonds? Could be insurance companies, could be mutual fund companies, could be high net worth individuals, could be individuals locally who are interested in buying the bonds. Anyway, a number of entities are going to loan money to the district through that process. And in return, you're going to pay them back over time, according to a set schedule. It's also that day when we go to underwrite that we lock in rates. And these are fixed rate bonds. So whatever the rates are, the day we lock them in, that's fixed for the life of the bonds. Okay? So you know what your costs are, just like your mortgage payment. You know what your payment is over the life of the loan. They do require voter approval. You can borrow up to 6% of your assessed valuation. There's a question about which assessed valuation can we use, and I'll touch on that when we get into your specific example. You have up to, well, again, you're a fire district. Every other entity, cities, towns, school districts, etc., when you have an election, from the moment of the election, you have 10 years to sell the debt. So you can sell it in year 1, year 4, year 8, and year 10. You can have 4 bond sales. You have to sell the bonds that the voter gave you authority to sell within a 10-year period. In the case of fire districts, it's silent as to expiration date. However, bond attorneys will say, try not to all be on 10 years. That's how other entities are. That's why we put it in there. Legal counsel may prevent a sale if they feel the voter authority has grown stale beyond 10 years, typically beyond 10 years. Besides, most CIP plans go out 5 to 10 years. If you're planning your capital projects, usually, your election will cover a 5 to 10 year time span. A couple other things here. Bond items can be used for just about anything capital or equipment related. It can also be used to repay leases, repay other debt. Okay, we'll talk about that here in a minute. Anything else? Oh, the middle one is the costs. Typically, for a bond sale, $10 million. The estimated costs of issuance, which is to pay the administrative costs on the bond sale, roughly around $50,000. That includes legal counsel, credit ratings. You're going to get a rating on your bonds at some point, not before the election, but when we're actually selling bonds, from Standard & Poor's or Moody's. There's paying agent. There's about 6 or 7 parties involved in every bond sale that we do. The costs are generally around 50. It could be 60, it could be 40, but somewhere around there depending on the players and the size of the issue and things of that nature. On top of that, there's an estimated underwriting fee of 1.5 to 2% on top of the size of the bonds. So whether it's 10 million or 15, it's a percentage of the bonds, since we're actually selling those to investors. And the more we sell, the more we have to pay salespeople to sell those bonds. So, yes, sir.
Quick question.
Yes.
The cost that we would incur with the professional consulting, the assistants from firms like yours,
Yes.
are those costs covered in the bond proceeds? Can those be covered by the bond proceeds?
Great question. Yes, absolutely. In fact, for fire districts, you can actually, if we're doing a $10 million bond sale, for instance, out of your 15, in my example, you could actually apply the entire principal amount, $10 million, towards your construction projects. And we can cover the entire cost, the $50,000 plus underwriting fees, out of premium raised on the bonds, which is borne out of the interest rate, to cover the cost. So that none of the costs come out of the district's budget. It's borne out of the cost of the financing itself. Very similar to a home mortgage. If you hire a mortgage broker and then you're also paying, for the appraisal, you're paying for all the things you need to do to get your mortgage, right? All of that is borne typically out of the interest rate. So I believe I answered that. Yep. And then there are some federal restrictions to bonds. The one I'm just going to point out is, if you're doing, in my illustration of $10 million in the first sale, if you're doing $10 million, it's because you probably reasonably expect to spend that $10 million within 3 years. Federal tax code, when we go to sell bonds, you don't want to sell more than you need for 3 years. Okay. You want to sell what you think you can spend within 3 years for federal tax code purposes. So when you get $10 million delivered to you from the first sale, you want to spend that down within 3 years towards your projects. Okay. Now, who determines the payments? Well, you do. We'll talk about structuring here. I'm going to show you some examples, and so I'll get into that in just a minute. And I mentioned who typically buys bonds. There's a list there, but I've already mentioned that. And then I didn't mention, but even if you're selling $10 million of bonds, and let's say you're repaying it over a 20-year period, maybe that's $500,000 a year for 20 years in principal that you're repaying every year. Well, that principal is not just $500,000; it's in $5,000 denominations. So an investor who may only have $20,000 to invest from Sedona say, can I buy $20,000 in year 5? Yes, you can. Okay. So there are in $5,000 increments, and I'll show you some sample structures here in a minute. Here's the Daisy Mountain case study. I'm not gonna go into it other than this page, just to show you what their program looked like, cause it may look similar to yours. They had in theirs construct a new fire station, 3.1, a new fire admin building, 2 million. You see remodeling 3 fire stations, fire apparatus and equipment, and then communications infrastructure upgrades, which totaled 16.23 for them. The one other box down below that is blank, they didn't need to do it. I don't think they had any leases at the time, but you can take bond, if you have any outstanding leases for capital projects or trucks, you can choose to, if you need to, take bond money and pay off the leases. You can't use the bond money to actually make the annual lease payments. You can take the bond money and pay it off, okay? So if you have an outstanding lease on a station for 2 million and you're paying that within your levy limit or your tax rate cap, as Gabe mentioned, you could pay that off and free up some budget money and move it over to the bond side. It's something you have the ability to do, not that you have to do it.
And just to follow up on that, kind of connect the two presentations, is that's where we also gain some ability to address that fund balance without raising taxes.
Now I'm gonna move to, specifically towards your district, some numbers. You saw some of these blue lines in Gabe's presentation. This is your assessed valuation history over the last 10 years. Very similar to every other issuer in the state. We had the run up in real estate values, and then we had the Great Recession. And then now what you see here in the blue is your market value is returning. Homes and commercials are growing, including new construction. The blue is what we call net full cash assessed value. It used to be called secondary assessed value. Okay, that's what you used to base all your tax rates on. Now, because of Prop 117, you base your tax rates on the orange column. We still show the blue column for a couple reasons, but one of them is to show, look, you're trending up still, right? Your real tax value out there, the value of all the property, is growing. You can see the blue is growing. It's just that the orange is, there's that limited 5% cap on existing home property in terms of growth, things of that nature. So, but it is a good sign that your blue is growing, because that probably means that your orange is going to be following it, albeit a little bit slower, right? So the orange line now, the last 2 years, is what you use. It's the limited property value. It's what you use to set your tax rate. Keep in mind the difference between the blue and the orange, because I'm also going to mention bonding capacity. Again, the orange is for calculating the tax rate these days. Limited property value did switch over. However,
If you're gonna go back for one
Yes.
second, if you look at the top, the 10-year average is just interesting in the second
yeah.
box there. The net AV for tax purposes is a 0.19 over 10 years. So our net assessed value really has been very flat over the 10 years, even though that lines go up and down and wherever
Yep.
it's at. But
thank you for
averaging it
pointing that
out.
out, yes. Because
Just
the
important.
growth, you had a lot of growth, but again, every year that goes by, you're chopping off the big growth years. And then you're adding on some other years that are growing, but not growing as much. And so your 10-year average is just above 0%, it's 0.19%, okay? And why is that meaningful? Well, statutorily, when we show numbers for bond elections and voter pamphlets, we're restricted to using the 10-year growth average and projecting assessed value. So even if you're growing, right now you're growing at your LPV, your orange column grew at 3.9% this year. We're not allowed to use that. We have to use the maximum of 0.19% for the future. I will say though that in February we're going to have your new assessed value and we can use that number. And I'm hoping that's going to give you a nice bump. Here's the makeup of who pays taxes in the district. You're probably aware of this: 70% residential, 18% commercial. So that, I don't know if that's, I'm sure you're aware of that as well, but mostly residential, and that's typical for communities outside of the heavy industrial area in Maricopa County. Here's where remember the difference between the blue column and the orange column? I don't know if it matters too much with your district, because I don't know if your needs are this great, but when Prop 117 was adopted, folks went back and had legislation change, because Prop 117 impacted bonding capacity calculations, which was, even ATRA says they never intended to have it impact the calculation of bonding capacity. So legislation was passed for cities and towns and school districts to bring the bonding capacity back to the blue column, which is net full cash assessed value. And so 6% of the net full cash for fire districts, you have a bonding capacity limit of 35 million. Now, I just heard less than 2 weeks ago that some lawyers are saying that fire districts may not have that same, the legislation that was passed for cities and towns and schools that gave them the ability to use the blue column, fire districts may not have that ability just yet. There may need to be legislation to bring you on parity with the other entities out there. So we need to do some further digging with bond lawyers on this, but I'm just giving you two numbers. You have a range between 30 and 35 million of bonding capacity right now. Not that you're gonna use it all, but as of right now, with your 500 million plus of assessed value, you have considerable bonding capacity. Okay, I'm gonna go through 4 scenarios. I'm not gonna spend a lot, I'm gonna spend some time on the first 2, and then the rest of them are gonna be relatively easy, and then I'll be finished. I promise. I have 4 scenarios for you, 1 a 10, 1 a 12 and a half, 1 a 15, and 1 a 20. So if you're somewhere in that ballpark, you can kind of get an idea where tax rate impact might be for your projects. This is a $10 million scenario, the first one. I'll point out that the first, well, column 2 is the assessed value. Remember, we can estimate, we can project growth in assessed value. However, I just kept it flat. So right now, your limited property value is 510 million. I just left that flat all the way down. We all know that that's either gonna grow or go up or down, right? Over the next 20 years, let's call it. And I think over the next 5, it's probably gonna trend up, like we've been seeing. But because of your 10-year growth average, we're stuck to that number. It's 0.19%. I don't think, I just kept it flat. I hope that's okay for the purposes of this example. So we left it flat. And then we sized a $10 million bond sale. And we paid it off over 20 years. You can pay it off over 30, or 10, or 15, or 25. And, why do we pick 20? Well, I'll go into, Gabe mentioned kind of matching the asset life of the project with the average life of the bonds. So, and I'll go in a little bit in more depth about that. If you are paying for a fire station, for instance, let's say it costs $4 million, $5 million, and you decide that we're very conservative, fiscally conservative folks, and we want to pay it off in 5 years, 10 years. Well, that facility has a useful life of 30 or 40. You tell me, but let's say north of 30, like a home, right? So what happens, so basically you'd be putting $5 million of debt to be paid off in the first 5 or 10 years, and all your current taxpayers would absorb that hit. And anybody that moves in the district in year 11 and after, for instance, gets 100% use of, if they live within the fire district, those assets, and they don't pay a dime towards taxes. And you're basically hitting your current taxpayers, to cover the cost of something that has a useful life of much longer. So you really want to think, and that term in finance is called intergenerational equity. Say that 10 times fast. Intergenerational equity. You kind of want to think about this, matching the repayment schedule with the assets that you're actually financing. Some of your assets, some of the things that you're building are fire stations. They may last 30 or 40 years. Some of the items may be fire trucks, which may have a 10-year useful life. Some of it may be computer equipment, which may have a 5-year useful life. Well, you'll see this in this $10 million scenario, we're paying off how much in the first 5 years? I'm just going to ballpark, maybe 2 or 3 million. We're paying off another maybe 2 or 3 million in years 6 through 10. So that can cover the computers and the trucks, and then the last 10 years, 11 through 20, or 25 if you want to go out further, can cover the longer term projects, roof replacements, new fire stations, rehabbing fire stations. So it's something to think about. We just did, for purposes of scenarios, we did a 20-year payback here. We can go out longer or we can go shorter, but you want to kind of think about the useful life of the asset versus the repayment of the debt. And because, again, the shorter the debt, the more the tax rate will be in the first 10 years, for instance. So in this instance, at 20-year repayment, we estimate interest, I think, at 4.75%. All the footnotes are on the next page. Yeah, 4.75%. Now, that's not the current market rate. The current market rate is 3.5, 3.25, somewhere around there. Why did we go so high? Well, if you call for an election this November and then sell bonds in the spring of next year, we're looking at not selling bonds for over a year from now. Not knowing where rates are going to be over a year from now, we try to put together a rate that's, we hope is conservative a year from now. We hope to outperform it. We hope the market stays in the 3% range, right? But, you know, in terms of you thinking about, you know, tax impacts and the residents, we want to at least have what we hope is a conservative rate. So that rate that we're showing is not a rate that we're saying you're going to get. I hope we get 3.5. I hope the market stays where it is right now or even lower by the time you go to sell bonds next year. But I've had it go the reverse. I've had it go up to that rate. We thought we were conservative, and I've had it go all the way up in my 21-year career. So anyway, but 4.75%. Then column 5 is your mortgage payment. That's principal plus interest equaling debt service. And then so you take that debt service, divide it by the assessed value, times 100, and that's 16 cents a year for the life of the $10 million bond election. At the very bottom of column 6 is the average annual tax rate. It happens to be 16 cents. Now, if I was growing your assessed value, which I'm not, I left it flat, it wouldn't be 16 cents, it'd be something a little bit lower, because as your assessed value grows, if you have the same debt payment, your tax rate will slowly decline over time. Just like when you're doing budget numbers. If your assessed value grows and your budget, your levy is the same, your tax rates will go down, and then if your assessed value goes down, your levy stays the same, your tax rates might go up. But anyway, so the average rate for 10 million is 16 cents. Keep that in mind. You go over to the impact to the residential homeowner here on this page. We have residential, commercial, and ag and vacant. I'm going to start with the second line on a residential. It's easier. On a $100,000 tax value, 16 cents equals $16 annually to the homeowner, or $1.34 a month. Now, if you have a average valued home in this district, we have that number there. That's $345,000, which is $55 and change a year, or $4.63 a month. About the cost of a foo-foo Starbucks drink monthly for 10 million. Now, it's easier if you have a home, whatever your home value is, it's easier to just ballpark it off the 100 grand. If you have a $700,000 home, multiply that number times 7. So that's how you can, help the residents who come talk to you how to equate their estimated tax impact. We also report this for commercial property as well and ag and vacant. So I have this for scenario 1 for 10 million. The next 3 scenarios, here's 12.5 million. Now the only difference here is I just wanted to show you, we didn't sell just one sale at 12.5. We broke it up, relatively speaking. We split it in half. 6.5 million the first sale and 6 million the second sale. Because you may not want to, you'll have to decide with all your projects, you'll probably have an immediate need to sell bonds to start building, but you may want to hold back some bonds for 2 or 3 years to replace equipment, for instance. My example I gave earlier today was school districts. They may want to, some big school districts bond $10 million for buses, but if they spent $10 million in year 1, sold all the bonds in the first year, bought all their buses, replaced their fleet, guess what happens 10 years from now? They all go bad at once within a similar time frame. So a lot of districts will, even though they ask for 10 million, they'll split up the sales, 3 million for buses the first sale, 3 million 3 years later, and 3 million another 3 years later, and then, so they'll have a nice rotation. Okay, so you may want to think about that for equipment rotation, trucks, and even hardware, computerware in year 4 and 5. So that's some reasons why you may want to consider 2 sales. Anyway, we show 2 sales. Again, both 20-year repayments. Right now, I don't know what you're actually bonding for. We can go shorter if the second sale is all equipment. We'll do a 5 or 10-year sale. If the first sale is all, building the new station, we can go out 25 years if you want. So we can kind of take a look at it based on the projects. And that's when we'll hone in on some real numbers come, let's say, May, when we actually have a list. Anyway, this tax impact for 12.5 million is 18 cents and change. So again, the previous one for 10 million was 16 cents. Now we're at 18 cents for an extra 2.5 million. Okay, and so it's $18 a year for a $100,000 home. And here's where I go even faster. All I did here was 15 million, 2 sales, kind of mirroring the previous 12 and a half, except I went up 2.5 million more. You see the tax rate at the bottom, the average annual tax rate impact is about 22 cents. So $22 a year for a $100,000 home. And then I did sort of, I don't know, not to exceed it, maybe you need to exceed it, but I did 20 million, 10 and 10. 10 million right after you pass the election, and 10 million 2 years later. And that's about a 30-cent impact. Well, it averages to 29 cents. So that's about $29 a year on a $100,000 home. So now you have 4 scenarios, and I mean, if that's within the ballpark, you can kind of extrapolate if you wind up doing 16 million, okay? We're happy to run some numbers once you get into some really solid numbers as well. But this is a good ballpark for you in your estimations. With that, I know I've been speaking a lot, and so I'm going to pause, see if there's any other questions I can answer. That kind of concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to continue if you like.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? No.
I think in this discussion, I think it'd be helpful to state perhaps, Chief, I'm thinking of Chief in this case, of why we're talking about this.
Be glad to.
But thank you very
Oh,
much.
absolutely.
Yes.
I'll be right over here, and I'll
Okay.
happy to join you back up.
So board, just the reason we have Stifel here today is to, we've identified we've got large capital needs such as fire station repairs, replacements, some expensive rolling stock that has needs over the next, 20 years. And as we spoke in both presentations about fiscal constraints as it relates to Prop 117, mill rates, AV concerns, PSPRS impacts, things like that. The fact that our AV is not going to recover for 10 to 15 years based upon where that's at. That's just getting back to where we were 10 or 15 years ago without any cost of adjustments. It certainly creates a situation that needs to be talked about. Whether or not we decide that this is the option to go with, it's an option to consider. I believe through Gabe and our conversation that it is an obligation for us to at least bring this forward as we are looking at these considerations for the fire district's needs going forward. With a $3.25 cap that's in place, while it may be able to be fit into the budget with Prop 117, I think it really makes it difficult. If Prop 117 wasn't in the mix, I think I might be having a different discussion. But with that restriction, I mean, you saw in Gabe's presentation, we made 3.97% increase in assessed value. I believe in the, if we were not under Prop 117, we would have saw, I believe it was a 13% increase, which would have, given us the flexibility in our mill rate. So that's what really brings us here today, is from a long-range planning need. I think when you look at the numbers, well, I don't know what number we need in that spectrum. It's certainly less than the 30 or 35 million that we're capable of bonding by far. The ability to pay this intergenerational equity concept is pretty interesting, because in many capacities, many of us, depends how you do your finances, but if, some decide to go out and finance a car, and my gosh, it used to be a decision between a 4-year loan or a 5-year loan, right? I mean, really cool people could do a 3, but, I never had that luxury. Now you rent car, or you get a car loan for like 8 years now, because they're so expensive and stuff like that. I mean, when you go to the dealership, like, you want an 8-year loan? I'm like, what? An 8-year loan? No. No. So this creates that span of whether we want to do a 10-year, because we're buying a fire truck and fire trucks, and we want to finance it that way. A fire station for 20 or 25 years, because that's the way we want to structure it and create those opportunities. But our main focus at this point is to create a sustainable business plan and a model to create efficient and effective response capabilities for the long term of our district. And the last thing that we really want to do is develop a model that just says, man, we really can't afford this. We really can't afford this. We really can't afford this. And at some point, somebody will be in this board meeting with why is this building falling down? Why did this happen? Why are we not able to respond anymore out of this station because it no longer is functional? and somebody's gonna be pointing to somebody, and that's what creates me and my interest to be here today, to at least say, we should be considering a bond as an option for us. You know, I think that the concept of shifting that tax is almost like, in essence, is an insurance policy, if you will, the way that you could actually look at this and go, hey, we wanna move the capacity to purchase these items, one, spread them over a longer period of time, and take them outside of our tax cap. It just gives us the assurance that if the AV does drop, or we do create a situation that we need to utilize those funds, we're not restricted by the tax cap. Well, we'll still be restricted by the tax cap, but this will be sitting outside of it. Does that make sense? So, while I don't see this as an immediate, as an increase in a tax of any sort, it increases our capacity, and in the case that we do see declines in AV, we do reach the cap at some point because of all the costs and things that we talked about. It affords us that ability.
What I'd like to see is, and we kind of have to move relatively quickly if we are gonna go down this road for this year, what would the net relief be to the taxpayer? In other words, we got a 1.3 or 1.4 million in capital expenses in the last budget, right? So in my mind, it's probably not this simple, but you could take that out and put it in a bond. So you could potentially see a reduction in the budget by $1.5 million each year by doing a bond. So if the if you take, cause you're talking about taking $250 for the Station 6 purchase, that could go on the bond and come out. So if you're only talking about $4 per 100,000 or whatever it was in here, to see an impact of the tax rate, the levy could go down potentially if you take out all that capital cost. What does that do on an annual basis to a taxpayer? And what is the impact at $4 per 100,000 or whatever that was? Is this going to save or cost the taxpayer money is kind of the bottom. I think it potentially could save.
And I agree with you. I think there's a potential to save. There's also the fact that we are transferring we have the same expenditure. We're just transferring the burden from the operating tax rate to a bond rate. And then also think about it this way though too, is we're spending cash right now, and there's an expense attached to these bonds. So there is a potential for an increase. But the other thing I wanted to mention too is we wouldn't be able to eliminate all of our capital, because there's still going to be small capital items that we're not going to push through onto the bond. But I think that and if we get direction from the board, we will look at that analysis and see what that does to our tax rate, and what's that net impact to the homeowner or property owner.
Quick question, I'm not sure who this is directed to. Are there any other financing alternatives out there besides bonds that could be used to pay for all of these improvements? And if there are, what are they exactly?
So as a fire district, we're allowed to finance basically one of three ways. One is through a lease purchase agreement, which is currently what we have at Station 6, which is similar to a regular loan mortgage. There's a certificate of participation, which is kind of the hybrid between the lease purchase and the bond. It does not require voter approval, but it is a rated security from that standpoint, and Mike could probably explain a little better than I can. And again, that's more of a board direction to make that purchase and finance it through a certificate of participation, and then there's the bond. The reason why Chief and myself are presenting the bond concept to you instead of the other financing instruments is those other financing instruments require us to rely on our tax levy that's limited to or tax rate and our tax levy that's limited to 325 and restricted under Prop 117. So those are options available to us, but those are the reasons why that's not being brought forward, and the bond at this time is being brought forward to consider.
What he said.
Okay, further questions or discussion?
So board, if I could, so at my oversight, this item is on the budget workshop, and so the discussion we're having here is important and critical. If the board does see fit, based upon the circle of activity up there, and there was an interest to consider to move forward, I would consider that you direct me to consider implementing a citizens advisory committee. However, because this is on the budget workshop and is not an agendized item, we need to actually take an emergency action. So legal counsel who left did provide me with some direction that I could walk through if there is an interest to create that Citizens Advisory Committee and take that action. I'd be happy to walk through that if there is an interest.
If that occurred at the February board meeting, I think we're still okay on the timeline you shared.
Yeah, we're okay, but we're really pushing it. It would be my oversight for not having it on as an agendized item, and I apologize for that and not catching that. And I'm glad I caught it before he left. Either way works. We could have a special meeting to do it, next week or something like that if we really wanted to do it that way. I'd prefer not wait till the February meeting. Meeting with labor today and everything, we definitely feel like we do want to begin to take a look at this as an option and see how we can put this together, and staff and I and everyone, we are somewhat interested in moving forward sooner than later, but certainly at your discretion. If you would prefer to wait till February, we will honor that and
I think
double
what
check.
would be helpful in making that decision, in being able to authorize however legal has allowed us to do that, is to have a better feel for the amount
The amount.
of the bond.
Since we're just
the
starting budget,
details.
we really haven't gone through any of the detail of what we're even talking about. I mean, obviously, Station 4 is what brought this about,
Right.
but this is not something you go back for every year. There's a limit on how often we can bond, correct?
So,
I'm
Well,
ta-
you can
and,
bond every year, go out for the bond election, but
well,
you really, when you go to the voters, you only want to go once every 5, 10 years. You can plan for a 5, 10-year capital improvement plan and then get epic growth and sell it all and spend it all in 5 years and go back. You can have 2 elections outstanding at the same time, but I don't think that's something some districts do that when they have explosive growth. I don't think that's something that normally you would want to do. You'd want to have an election, pass it, sell bonds, finish the program, down the road of life, have another election when you have new needs.
So, and to piggyback off of that, I mean, even today, Mike talked about even some places, even though we're capped at a 30 million or 35 million, some places actually even go for a bond more than, now I'm not recommending that, but more than they're able to bond, because they know their AV is gonna grow, and they're gonna grow into that bonding capacity. We're not talking about that. So there's a lot of flexibility, is I guess what I'm trying to get to with what Mike just said and your question. I think it's more important that we have the Citizens Committee begin to evaluate what the needs are. I have a list of what I think kind of needs to be done, but the intent of that Citizens Committee is to really help, have that insight and start going, yeah, you're right, you do need that. I can tell you from the 2007 projects that they put together the last time we had a Citizens Committee, like I said, we've removed number 1 and number 3, but number 2 and number 4, which now I guess will become 1 and 2 if that remains to be
which are
true.
stations.
Station 5 was the second priority back in 2007, and Station 4 was the number 4 priority.
Those are obviously our top 2 priorities, but I imagine there's other things
Yes.
that you're putting in the
Yeah,
bond.
so we have issues,
some
and we haven't even addressed
remodeling.
telecom issues. Renovation of Station 1 refurbishment was number 6 on this list.
Yeah, I think there's gotta be a lot more discussion before I'm totally open to come back and have a special meeting.
Okay.
But in the interest of time, it's already 6:30.
Okay.
And we haven't even gotten to the business meeting yet. I would recommend if we're on a timetable for this, I'd recommend we set a special meeting.
We'll set a special meeting. And if you are directing us to come up with that number hard and fast, we will do that at your direction.
I don't think you can get a hard and fast number,
well,
but I think we need to
A
have a
ballpark.
discussion of
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
I can tell you the ballpark is about $15 million today. I mean, I'll give you that ballpark. I don't know what we'll find that doesn't address necessarily telecom needs, it doesn't address, but as a ballpark, that's probably a $15 million thinking about down the road. It could be $17 million, it could be 13, but
But in that vicinity, that's very helpful.
$15 million is
Very
what I
helpful.
would ballpark if that's what you're looking for and be helpful.
Chief, I'm just curious though, what was the mechanism that you feel we could use if we wanted to direct you to start the process of putting
So
together the
we need
citizens
to take an emergency action. There's a 4-step process. You declare there's a need to establish a citizens committee, and the deadlines that are imposed are such that we would want to do that. and then find the need that it does constitute an emergency, and then entertain a motion to direct me to establish a citizens committee and so forth. Certainly within the rights and potential to do. If you're more comfortable coming back next week, happy to do that. I just don't know that I want to wait till next February and, or in the middle of February to do that. We'd like to get the ball rolling, create the people, the interests from the community, so they can, get back to us if they're interested, so we can really start. We'd like to start meetings ideally at beginning of March. And if we put this out in the middle of February after the next board meeting that, hey, we're interested, it's just a very short window to say who's interested, make some selections.
Well, let me
Get
throw
meetings.
out returning next Wednesday at 4 o'clock for a meeting just specifically about that. Anybody?
I think I have to move somewhere.
I'll be out of town.
Okay.
Next,
Anybody?
so what day?
That's Thursday.
25th.
No,
25th.
Arbinger will be.
I should be in town.
On the 25th?
That was Tuesday.
Okay.
What I'm concerned about is that I know how quickly time passes by, and putting together a citizens committee and setting up meetings and having them do their job will take some time. So I think it's critical that we start it as soon as possible. And also, I think the amount, whether it's 15 million or 12 or 20, whatever, I think the citizens committee might have something to say about
That's
that.
what I was trying to get to.
And so we may think, well, 15 million is the right number, but after we hear from a citizens committee, maybe it's 20, or maybe it's only 12, I don't know.
Correct.
But I think it's really critical that it'll take some time to, number one, get it set up, and number two, start scheduling meetings.
Correct.
So the sooner the better.
You've been through this before, so
I've been through it a number of times, and I think Chris is on the right track. I totally agree with the need to have a citizens committee, because I think as we go out to the public, it'll be important to have a committee who is behind whatever we end up proposing to do.
And board, to be clear, I would recommend that we look at a citizens committee comprised of about 5 community members, maybe 2 members or so that, and we can be loose with it, 6 community members, but 2 business members, 5 community members, so they represent their respective agents, groups in the city, a board member, a labor member, and an executive administrative person as well. I think that rounds out to 10 if I missed somebody. Board member, community member, member of management, yeah, that's, so
Do you
looking
have
at a committee of
some
10, maybe 11, maybe we get 6 or 7 really highly qualified folks, and we, really can't pick and choose, so maybe we aim for 5, but if we get to 7, that's okay, but we're looking for 10, 11 is really where we're trying to look. So if you, again, give that, if you were to go that route, to give that ability to be flexible, so we can get a highly functioning committee that can help move this forward, or may determine that, hey, there's not a need. That may be the end result of the citizen committee, right? That they may determine that there's really not a need, and that's what they're engaged with, so that when you're coming down to that June and calling the election, we've vetted all the thoughts, the ideas, they've done all their homework, and you can make a conscious decision in June or July, wherever that deadline is when we call the county, to say, yeah, this is what we've determined needs, the work's been done, and we're comfortable with that, or they're not comfortable with that. And there's pieces and parts that go, it's a complex machine, right? Whether we make this go, and we want to be successful in that process as well, so.
And so the mechanism that Mr. Whittington
Yeah,
shared with you?
so we'd want to declare that there's a need to establish a citizens committee in order to meet the deadlines imposed by the district's public finance representatives. So if you determine that's true,
So yeah, and hear from the other members.
That's true.
I think so. Definitely.
Okay,
then you would need to determine that constitutes an emergency based upon our time and some of the things that are in there, and you define that emergency
I
by
think it just was stated,
statute.
so.
And then we need to entertain a motion to author the chief to establish the citizens committee, which will also be subject to open meeting laws and all those things by you authorizing that to happen. It creates that mechanism for open meeting laws and all the requirements that go with that as well. So we're clear on that. So if someone did that,
Tim, do you want to, you can just invoke the motion as stated.
I so moved.
Okay, so he's the first. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion?
Any
All in
comments or
favor?
questions or concerns regarding the makeup I spoke to? Is there, you guys?
Yes, I had.
concept?
Did you mention business?
Yes.
You did.
Yeah, I'd like to see 5 or 6 community members, residents that
Yeah.
represent, and then 1 or 2 business folks.
Very good.
Yeah, business members.
No, this will give him the structure he just defined to move forward with finding those people,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
10 or 11 people. Okay? Further discussion?
One quick question. Would you want any recommendations from board members about potential members or?
Yes,
or-
if you have any insight or thoughts, we'll create some sort of application or interest form that can kind of explain who you are, what you're about, why you think you'd be a good fit for the committee, things like that, and then we determine whether that's adequate enough, or if we interview folks or try to create the process that determines who the final candidates are, if you will, and get that rolling. And, yeah, so that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The last thing, board, that we'll need to do is we'll need to post a notice within 24 hours explaining to the public the reason the matter was handled on this emergency basis, and so
Tricia is nodding her head.
Got it? We've done that before, so.
Tricia's all over it.
Mr. Whittington said he'd be glad to help make that happen, but I told her we were in good hands. So, I thank you for that. My apologies, board, that was a complete oversight on my behalf, and I will take that and apologize. So, thank you for indulging us in that.
And I encourage us all to be thinking about which of us may want to serve on the committee if you do want a board member.
I think it would be good,
Okay.
so.
Okay. Where are we?
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much for your
thank you.
time.
Thank you. So we don't need to have a meeting next week, right?
No,
We do, I'm gonna try to get Jerome first, if I can pull out
I mean, I'll meet you over here if you want.
That's okay.
Okay, public forum? No, you're,
No,
You
did
don't
you
like
guys
my-
already made the motion to take the minutes? You did that already,
yep,
right?
we did that,
Okay.
we did A already, we're back on track, we're on.
I don't know who takes care of public forum, and we're missing Gary, so is that you now? Are you the new public forum guy? We haven't trained you in that, I suppose.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I will-
Did I miss?
No.
If we
no.
missed, I'll open,
Did I
is
miss
there anyone
something?
here who wishes to speak?
Okay.
Okay, we've covered public forum.
Board, if I may ask, I know the auditor's here, and we have a response issue back there, trying to get Mark Howard and back to duty. Is there any way we can move up the drone presentation for a quick drone presentation
Sure.
to get him back to saving lives and protecting property? 7 minutes.
Okay.
Start your timers.
You do wanna understand, time is valuable and it's late, so. Well. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, you're gonna be on this one up here.
Board, is
So-
you, okay.
Pardon me. So, members of the board, I'd like to introduce Mark Howard. Mark is one of the firefighters, the military veteran that put some of his military education money, I guess you could say, to work to become a helicopter pilot. And right now, he is the authorized drone pilot. There's certain rules and regulations that we try to spell out in depth in the board packets. We have to go over them here that explain the requirements for operating the drone legally in a public safety, as a public safety entity. And so Mark's the one right now that allows us to do that. He's also the one that has the level of training, the qualifications to begin some pilot programs on training other people to be able to do that as well. And so my intent behind the short presentation was, instead of talking about the drone while we have it back here, I'll show you some different video of some of the different applications that we've been using this very small, very limited drone to kind of do a proof of concept with. And then we're gonna continue to compile that information. We'll come back to Chief Biter and Chief Kazian with what we found out as far as the capabilities and the limitations of this particular platform. And with that, look at, what the opportunities are for us to improve service with this, if there are any. That's fundamentally. So basically, right now, we have a really fancy toy, and that has,
Sorry. Please use the microphone because it's for the recording.
sorry. So right now, we have a high-end toy
I mean, fundamentally, but it has all the requirements as far as the licensing and how its use that a larger, more robust platform that had infrared, things like that was more designed for search and rescue does. But we've actually still had the opportunity to get some good use out of this. So with that, I'll just show you this quick video if you're all right with that, and then we will move on.
You have music on this?
No, I didn't put music, so we could talk. So right here, this is from at Grasshopper Point, this the first 20, 30 seconds of this video. And the particular camera system that's on it right now doesn't allow you to zoom in, but it does shoot real high resolution 4K video. So what we did is we're flying along the edge of the rimrock here, just trying to assess if we had a lost person out there, our ability to spot them in the snow. One of the things we found and become a lot more apparent in one of the later clips is that even a person when they're not wearing white clothing, they're hard to see on the dirt, really hard to see without the infrared camera. But the practical application of being able to move it from that location and cover a large area was really what we're driving at right here. And as we went down the canyon, we would slide off to the left there and look down, and so we could assess for any hazards in the water, especially if we had any damming issues or whatever from post-flood. And this video, what we did was we had basically similar to what happened on Lee Mountain, where we had a climber, or in that case a base jumper, that was stuck mid-slope. We had a lot of difficulty determining what the best access was. So what we're doing here is just flying up that crack line to determine whether or not we could access the patient from below, or if it was best to get people up on top and go down and down. And then once we got up to the top of it, then what I asked Mark to do, I said, all right, simulate that we need to find a secondary means of egress, like we can't get an aircraft up to the top of there because of weather or whatever. And so it was kind of neat. We followed those ridges out and could figure out, the best routing to get in there, and do that in much more quickly than it would be if we sent somebody up there to scout a route. And you're not exposing anybody like you would be if you're trying to route find in that kind of terrain. As you can see, it's not real easy hiking. Pretty, but not real easy hiking. So, one of the other things we were looking at was if you wanted to quickly assess whether a vehicle that you're looking for, suppose you get a call, which we have before up Schnebly Hill Road, for vehicles on fire or a rollover when they're uncertain of their location. And so what we did, I said, just fly up the road. You see the people there on your left, and simulate that we're looking for a vehicle or a fire. And so it took about a little less than a minute to cover all the way up to the third switchback, going up Schnebly Hill Road, which for those of you that, oh man, that road's so terrible. That'd probably take you 5 minutes, I bet, at least, maybe longer.
What's
And
the range?
Mark Howard, what's the range?
It has to be flown in visual line of sight, so I have to be able to see it to fly it legally. As far as its capabilities, it's roughly 2 to 3 miles distant, and then the HD video transmission range is about 1.5 to 2 miles based on weather, terrain.
So in this, what we did, said, all right, Mark, we're at one end of the parking lot. We have a barricade situation where there's maybe something where there's a hazmat scene, officer involved shooting, something like that. How quickly we get up and get over there and get eyes on it. Then we used it here for our pre-planning. So we went over the top of the Taco Bell / KFC, old Taco Bell, and Mark just flew around and took different video from different position. You could tell the roof loading. You could tell what the best access was onto the roof. You can see where those those hazards were. If there's a fire in there, were those big heavy things you wouldn't want to be under. And in here, this is similar to what we use it for in an actual application, assisting Camp Verde or Copper Canyon Fire and Medical. What was to just take a look at the water conditions, look for any foot entrapment areas, any places where there was other concerns with the hazards to the rescuers.
How close is he?
It's a very wide angle
Close.
camera, so yeah,
Inch off
it
the
looks
ground.
scarier than it
How
really
far
was.
off the ground is it?
Oh, probably 2 feet, 3 feet.
Well, that's tight maneuvering.
Yeah. And they're here for sometimes with the bridges we get stuff impacted underneath them, it's hard to tell what's under there. So I was like, all right, fly along the side of it, see if we were looking for, log jams, things like that get underneath the bridge and compromise the integrity of the bridge. So it was pretty stable platform to be able to just slide sideways and assess that.
That's crazy.
And then, this last little section kind of dual purposes. One, if you're trying to determine, if there's a vehicle out in there, you could imagine that you'd be flying over that vehicle. But the other thing is, as we continue to try to educate the public about the hazards of the, crossing flooded roadways, some things like this, I think maybe it would be more impactful when it comes to our public service announcements to show them what that hazard looks like and say, hey, this is when the creek's at 5 feet on the Talakepaki gauge. So, you don't want to cross the creek when it's at 5 feet on the gauge. This is wrapping up with the last little video. I was going to grab my notes.
So that really helps us just thinking about that. So that whole subdivision is blocked off to our access short of the footbridge. So if we had an incident, report of something going on over there, we other than going across the bridge ourselves, and we were actually, when we had an incident, we had water up to the bridge actually 2 years ago or something like that. I think it was, right, Ed, when you were.
What is your plan for going? You can't drive a truck over that.
No.
So how do you get over there?
Hand jack, you'd go over the pedestrian bridge, and then you would hand jack basically the same type of hose that we use for wildland fires. Over there, that lighter jacketed hose would be our primary plan.
Mine would be in search and rescue and attempt to mitigate exposures.
Challenging.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought the question was if there's a fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
a house fire.
I just mean, how do you get it? You're not going to get a truck across there.
Lots of hose, manual hose. The next drone will carry hose. Yeah, it'll do water drop. It'll just program it to do it by itself.
So something else that was kind of a interesting byproduct of this was that on our Facebook page, we put these up. They were picked up from a lot of different news agencies. Gave us an opportunity to get our public service messages out there about crossing flooded waterways, that kind of stuff, and a lot more exposure than we would just by putting up regular PSAs. Which I look back to some of them that I put on our Facebook page that were just words, and they get 1,000 hits maybe. And with the 4 different videos that we put up on the Facebook page with accompanying messages about swift water hazards, one of them I try to emphasize, make sure your cell phone's charged and you keep it with you when you're hiking. We find you a lot easier. And it's about, well, it was 375,686 different, the reach, so the number of people that had accessed that page. So, and on 4 different, so it was pretty interesting how much of a more beneficial tool for getting the information out to the public it was.
Reached Hong Kong, Germany.
Oh yeah,
They shared
El
our pages. You
Salvador.
can see who shares.
So-
It's kind of interesting.
That's pretty much it for me. I mean, that was what I wanted to share with y'all.
So I wanted to bring Jason and Mark to the event. You want to bring the drone up here so at least I can see it a little bit up close?
Yeah, fly it up here.
Is the plan just to keep one drone in the department, or would you try to get other drones?
Where are the bond committee? Look at that.
No,
Or a better drone, a drone with
So,
infrared?
yeah, so better drones. So when you look at this, this drone is a more entry level drone. And entry, it's a step up from entry. I mean, it's not, the thing you get at Radio Shack and you have your kids go play with necessarily. But when we talked about what we wanted to do, there are much higher level drones. And so part of our discussion was, let's entry level with this. Let's figure out what it can do for us, how well it will work with us. Let's evaluate how many times we use it on an incident, and we wish it had A, B, and C that the next platforms can provide to help validate why we want to go to the next level. So in short order, in the Copper Canyon rescue that they did, they were able to fly the drone up, get upstream to see if any debris was floating down, be able to get eyes on the people, or and things like that. Make some really good decisions that would not have been able to be made as accurately in looking at that screen in a very short order. It's 2-minute deployment time. Is that?
Roughly, I can have it up in the air in 2 minutes. From the blocks to up in the air in 2 minutes.
One of our goals is to not, take Mark Howard from pulling the hose and putting the fire out, so to speak, right? I mean, that's still his primary focus, but if and when and how this tool gets utilized is really critical. So it won't be on, you know, the first truck pulls out and we pull a drone out to, you know, do a size up or something like that. I mean, maybe we'll get to that someday, I have no idea, but that's not the intent. But the other day, we had a rescue on Thunder Mountain, not the one the big one. It was a small rescue, if you will. It was just a quarter-mile in or something like that. But I was with the battalion chief, and we were, you know, talking in his car, waiting for the crews to get, you know, back, and fairly minor rescue. But I thought, what a neat, you know, you could fly the drone up there, get over and be watching your folks working as a set of eyes, safety, you know, looking what they need, kind of looking again around, hey, they need another crew, they don't need another crew, things like that. So, I mean, the applications are really limited only upon who can fly it, who's on duty, and a few limited things that preclude us. But we've illustrated on numerous occasions already in a training fashion, and on one real incident, if you will, it's very, very beneficial. And the infrared that it's missing and a couple other things kick us up in the platforms. But I think we've talked before about when we're flying this thing and learning it, you know, there's dangers associated with that, right? You know, so we want to make sure that we're highly skilled and capable, have a good program in place, and then we'll be coming back with, you know, potential future needs to go, hey, this program's really working. Let's look at a next generation, if you will, and they don't bring hose necessarily, but you know, they can fly in ADs. You know, there's demoing that in Sweden or, you know, Germany or something like that right now. They have ones that can, you know, carry a payload of how much?
They're a couple kilograms, I think was all that one was.
So dropping water to a person who needs water, dropping a portable radio to somebody who needs, you know, communications with us, don't move, whatever, you know, that type of thing. And there's just tons and tons of opportunity. It's just a matter of us getting proficient in it and creating it. But I applaud both Battalion Chief Coyle and certainly Mark Howard for his hard work and dedication to making this fly. And, you know, we talk about it being a toy, you know, but it can be perceived that's really a tool that we're using as a life safety device, and creating that. And as you saw him fly, it's smooth. I mean, and I've been impressed every time I see it on Facebook or I get a video upload or whatever from these guys. And so I again thank you for bringing it forward. And I think you're honored to be the pilot license number 1. Is that what you told me?
For Arizona, I actually was able to sneak in and get the first remote pilot license for the state of Arizona.
He was up till midnight, 11:59, kept hitting, and then he got in. And
Well, he's a commercial helicopter pilot, so I don't think the test was probably that difficult for him. So let's be fair.
Because we're not the only district experimenting with drones, but as Mark has brought to the attention of a few larger departments, we are the only one that is actually certified to do it.
It's
So,
incredible.
I mean, that's good on us and Jason for putting that program together with Mark.
And with that, to end that, is that we do have obviously a lot of aircraft, you know, in the area of helicopters doing sightseeing tours, having the airport nearby and things. And so there's restrictions and things that we have to be cognizant of. And so, again, different rules than your other friend that works at some other fire department that has none of those, you know, concerns. So we have to comply with FAA and work with the airport and stuff. And we've had a good relationship there, too.
We do, you know, I made the comment about it being a toy. What we did is we looked for a platform that it's the operation of it was very similar, if not, a matter of fact, it's very, very similar to what the larger end one was, and basically one that we could get at a less expensive one that would still accomplish that training mission. And at the same time, because the other cost associated with actually time and money is training other people to be the pilots. So it's nothing that we're trying to rush into right now, because we want to make sure that we demonstrate, like through this beta test with a couple people that have shown interest in going through the different training to become qualified, and then we'll come back and I'll provide Chief Criteria with the information about what those the hours it took, you know, costs associated with the stuff too. So when we move forward, we'll have a clear understanding of what the impact is going to be, along with what the benefit is going to be.
Cool.
So that's pretty much.
Thank you both.
All right, thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much.
Fly it out of here.
We can fly indoors if you want to see it fly. It's kind of anticlimactic in here.
No, I think it'd be pretty scary. You know, it's pretty simple till it lifts, and it's all of its landing gear pops up, and then you're like, oh crap, this thing's for real. And he's good. I wish Jason showed you the video of the first flight. It wasn't quite like those videos. The Air Force, the Airwolf video. Oh yeah. A little different than these ones.
All right.
Thank you, board, for letting us get them up front, and thank you to Jay for patience.
And so speaking of that, I can think that's where we are. So financial audit.
Yes, board, we've got the financial audit. If Gabe would like to say anything else?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Jay Park with Walker Armstrong's been the auditor of record for the district for, I believe, the last 4 years. And so they completed the audit. For the most part, everything went very well, and without wasting more time, I'll let Jay get into the presentation on the audit. I'll hand out the audit so he can start talking.
Thank you, Dave. We have a presentation, and then we have several documents here. The presentation is going to be a lot more interesting, just because it's a lot more concise and summarized, but we're going to hand this out to you as well, so you'll have this information.
You want to read the audit?
Thank you, sir.
All right. So you're, oh, on that TV there. Ed, what did you do on that TV over there again?
Just hit laptop.
Hit laptop again?
Yeah. Should do. It should wake it up. Well, that's what I always do when it works.
Laptop on TV? Ed's the mastermind.
I've been wondering.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Jay Park. I'm representing the firm of Walker and Armstrong, and pleased to present the results of the 2016 audit to you tonight. I'm going to walk through several documents in a fairly high-level summarized fashion. There are 3 documents that you have tonight. We have the audited financial statements, we have the report on internal control, and then we have another document called the advisory comment letter, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through all 3 of those documents tonight through the presentation. You're welcome to go through the documents that you have as well, because I'm going to point out certain areas in those documents that you might be interested in as I walk through the presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off at a fairly high level and just give you an overview of how the audit went, what the overall results were, some of our overall findings during the audit. So I'm going to start off with this slide. This is called the summary of audit results. And before I go into a lot of detail here, I think what I'd like to do is just give you an overview of how the audit went this year. We we were up performing our audit in November, and we went through the audit process. We do a lot of work. We do quite a bit of testing of internal controls, and then we move into what we call the substantive area, which is testing all the balances in your accounting records that ultimately become part of the financial statements. And this year, fiscal year 2016, I think I would say it's probably the best that we've had since we've been auditing the district. And I want to point that out because we've had some ups and downs in our audits. We've had years in which we've had material weaknesses that we've reported to the board, material weaknesses in internal controls. And so those are significant matters, breakdowns in internal controls that we're obligated to report if we come across such matters. So just in terms of our ability to get through the process, it went very well. And so I really wanted to point that out. I appreciate management's assistance and everybody that was involved in the process. So that being said, I'm going to get into some of the detail though. First off, bullet number 1. In the audit report, you'll see the independent auditor's report, and it's a 3-page document. There's a lot of language in there, but the most important thing that I'd like to point out is that we are expressing what we refer to as an unmodified opinion on the financial statements for the 2016 audit. And that's consistent with our opinions over ever since we've been performing the audit for the district. That is the type of opinion that organizations strive to achieve. Doesn't always happen. During the course of my work, sometimes we have to disclaim an opinion, which means we just can't complete our audit. There's insufficient supporting documentation. There's problems with our ability to express an opinion. Sometimes an adverse opinion or a modified opinion. But in this case, it's a clean opinion. So what we're saying there is that the financial statements are materially correct in accordance with the accounting rules that the district is required to follow. We refer to that as generally accepted accounting principles. So that aspect of it, very positive. A few highlights that I would like to point out. I mentioned this just more in general, but specifically in terms of our audit process compared to prior years, the reconciliations, the overall quality of the records is the best that we've seen it since we've been performing the audit. So that's that first bullet there. Account reconciliations have improved from prior years. Not a whole lot of changes in terms of accounting pronouncements this year. You will see, as you look through the documents, various references to this thing called we call GASB Statement Number 72. This was the only new accounting pronouncement that had any impact at all on the district, and for you, it was very minimal, slight changes to some disclosures related to investments, but overall, everything else is fairly consistent. One of the things that we are reporting as part of our audit, and it's included in the financial statements, is this is something that was new, is the district's participation in ASRS. Previously, the district was solely in the public safety retirement system as part of the state. There was other benefit plans as well, but so that's new, and that's going to be in the report. Other significant items, new debts. There was capital lease proceeds of approximately $570,000, and so that was something that we did our audit test work on, so that's significant in terms of 2016. Bullet number 3, key financial performance measures. I list out 3 things that are really key in terms of the financial statements, particularly as it relates to your overall financial health of the district. Item number 1, net position, $5.1 million in 2006 versus $3.7 million in 2015, so that increased. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as to why that occurred. But just from a kind of a higher level perspective, the overall health of the district, financial health, is strong. We do a lot of work for districts, a lot of governments just in general, and this district has done a good job in terms of maintaining a strong general fund balance, as well as maintaining liquidity, cash investments. So that's a positive. During the year, cash investments increased from prior year, an increase of $482,000. And then there was an overall increase in combined fund balances of $811,000. So overall, really positive for the district in terms of liquidity, cash, and overall financial position. There is one item that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation, one internal control matter. This is not something that we consider to be a material weakness or deficiency, significant deficiency, but it is an internal control issue that is in one of the documents that we are issuing, and it relates to the overall budgeting process and how that's working out, and account coding. Okay, so let's move into a bit of detail. This is a summary of one of the statements, one of the financial statements called the Statement of Net Position. And this is a very high-level overview of assets and liabilities and net position. I just talked about net position being $5.1 million, which is healthy for the district. So this shows some of the changes from prior year. You have total assets and deferred outflows, an increase of $2.4 million. Liabilities and deferred inflows, increase of $956,000. So again, your liquidity, your assets went up quite a bit more than your liabilities did. So that's why you have an overall increase in net position of $1.5 million. So. And again, cash investments down at the bottom, increase of $482,000. Property and equipment. There was quite a bit of outlays in terms of capital outlays, things like equipment, about $1.6 million. The net increase is $735,000. That's because we have something called depreciation, which is an amortization of the asset values over their useful life. And then long-term liabilities, a net increase of $704,000. I mentioned the capital lease earlier. That was $590,000. There was also some changes in the pension liabilities that we brought on the books from last year for the first time. And so that's why we have this overall net increase there. Okay, this is looking at just one area of the district's financial position, focusing on assets. Assets are things that you own or that people owe you in terms of money owed to the district. Cash investments, 27% of total assets at $4.8 million. Of that, about $3.5 million is in the general fund, so very strong there. Other assets of $1.1 million. That's really largely comprised of receivables outstanding. A lot of that's things like ambulance receivables, amounts owed to the district. And then capital assets, consistent with other districts. Fire districts tend to be fairly capital intensive with fire stations, engines, ambulances, etc. So that represents 67% of your overall financial position, your overall assets there. The next slide is focused on liabilities. These are amounts the district owes either to vendors or others. We have capital leases, compensated absences, and then the big one there is the net pension liability at 76%. And that was a liability that was brought on for the first time last year, fiscal year 2015. Okay, this slide focuses on revenues. Okay, these are revenues that have been earned by the district. Taxes, property tax primarily, increase of about $1.6 million. That was caused by about a 2% increase in the assessed value and a 29-cent tax levy increase from 15 to 16. Charges for services, that's primarily ambulance revenues. There's an increase there, about $243,000, and a slight increase in other types of revenue. So overall increase in revenues is just under $1.9 million. So that's definitely contributing to the increase in cash investments. On the expense side, I have two slides talking about expenses. The first one is intended to show where we are in terms of 16 versus 15. And you can see they're overall really consistent. You can see the red is 2015, the blue is 2016. So salaries is down slightly. Everything else in terms of operating expenses, really fairly consistent with prior year. The next slide shows the detail of that. You'll see where salaries and related went down about $121,000. Another big dip there in expenses is dispatch fees, 245,000. A lot of the reason for the overall decrease in expenses is the closure of the communications center. So we have an overall decrease in expenses of just under $450,000 during the year. Any questions so far before I go any further? All right. I think everybody's probably hungry and tired, huh? All right. I'm almost done. We're almost there. Okay. Required communications to the governing board. There is a document that you don't have, but it is available to you. It's something that we brought up tonight. And I'm going to summarize it really quickly here. There are certain things that as auditors we are required to communicate to the board, and so this is a summary of those items. One, we are required to discuss with you accounting policies. There's a note disclosure in the audited financial statements, note 1, that talks about those policies that district's management has adopted related to accounting. And there was a slight change there with the implementation of this new GASB. Estimates. Within the financial statements, accounting is not totally 100% black and white. And so as part of the accounting rules, sometimes management has to use estimates. And we point out what those are in terms of the more significant estimates, which is the allowance for uncollectible receivables on ambulance revenues and pension-related balances. Difficulties. If we come out and we have a really hard time getting through the audit, let's say we have a hard time getting documentation, management's giving a hard time, anything like that, we're required to talk about that. And we're actually required to put it in writing so that the board is aware of that. For the purpose of this audit, like I said earlier, the audit went very well. I've actually only had that happen a couple times. And also any disagreements. If there's any disagreements, I'm required to report that to you, and there were none. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements. We had a few, 5 corrections that we proposed as part of our audits, and so we have a listing there that's included with this document, but what they were related to capital lease proceeds, and then we also had a correction for grant revenue. But again, it's much less than it's been in prior years. So prior years, we've had more audit corrections. So we're happy about that. Bullet number 5, management representations. Management is required to put in writing certain things to us, and they've done that. They're required to tell us that they believe the financial statements are materially correct. They've disclosed everything to us. Everything they've told us is truthful, et cetera. So that's in writing, and that's included in this one document to you. And then management's consultations with other accountants. We're not aware of any accountants that were consulted with related to financial matters involving external reporting. So, okay. And then I mentioned earlier about this comment that we had on internal controls. What it was is when we were looking at the budget, a matter came up where there was about $2.2 million of budget variances for 2 specific departments, operations and EMS. And when we were working with management on that as to why that was the case, because they were offsetting. One had a budget variance of about $2.2 million, as did the other going in the opposite direction. What we found is that the coding of expenses was not consistent, it was not being done correctly or in accordance with the budget. And so that's something our recommendation is to make sure that the coding is correct in terms of expenses for the various departments, and that it's also consistent with the budget. And that's useful in terms of having internal information, so you have budget variances that make sense, and that way the board's aware of it as well as management. Okay, that is it for my presentation. Any questions? Anything I can assist with? Yes, sir.
So what I'm hearing is that we're in pretty good shape.
Yes, this audit went well in terms of overall financial health. The district is healthy in terms of cash investments, And internal controls, again, we had that one matter that we've reported, but everything else, we believe the district has strong internal controls in the other areas. So yes, it was a good audit.
Just to follow up on that, Jay and I had spoken last night about the issue, and that issue has been addressed. There are some past practices of reallocating funds within the budget and things of that nature, and not only with our involvement now in the district and doing that kind of that third party reconciliation of the accounting and everything, but we've also eliminated the practices of once the board adopts a budget of spending dollars for operations, whether it's an operations or an EMS, we keep those dollars allocated in there unless we come with a formal budget amendment. So, and I just want to kind of add in the other thing too is that Pam was, although she's not here this evening, was a huge part in getting this audit done as well as Jay has informed you. So,
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
we need a motion.
Oh, that's right, we need a motion to accept and approve the financial audit.
Second.
Oh, okay, I'll make an audit. I'll just make it.
I thought you made it.
We have a second for Abe. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you again for your work on this, appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
And I think thanks to Gabe and Pam as well.
Thank you. I'm gonna get on the financial report with them. So.
Yeah, let's talk about numbers some more.
Let's talk about some numbers. I don't know if you guys, we haven't really talked about fund balances or anything today. So I'm going to,
Finance is taking all the time today, let's just be clear.
You got dinner coming in?
Dinner's coming in soon, man.
Chief has been running me into the ground. I told him I'm on overtime now. I've been here for 12 hours today. So
I told him we're just getting started, that's just a normal day.
So, I think we've talked in depth about numbers, but we do need to go through the December financial report, which you do have included in your packet. So starting with, and I'm going to be brief, if there's something you want me to expand upon, I will be happy to. But let's start with our tax levy revenue for the month of December was just over $1 million at $1,006,031. Budgeted for the month was 1.2 million. So before I told you we were trending ahead, which we are year to date, but the month of December kind of slowed down a little bit on the historical collection comparison. Non-levy revenue was at 158,447 compared to budget of 180,463, and that was related primarily to ambulance revenue timing. So when we look at our expenses, as you can see, the green line being our budgeted, our actual, and the grayer line being our budgeted. You can see pretty much across the line, with the exception of managerial costs, we are either at budget or under budget through the month of December. Total expenses for the month were $1,043,966, which was under budget by $276,000 for the month of December. Looking at year to date, you'll see again when we look at our actual numbers. I just realized we switched the colors from slide to slide, but actual is gray now and green is budgeted. You'll see that again, our actual and our revenue is trending over, as we discussed earlier, and then on our expenses, our actual is trending under. Again, we do anticipate being under from a year to date, from a full fiscal year. Currently, as I said earlier, we're at $916,332 under budget year to date. But again, that gap is going to narrow as we hit the later part of the fiscal year and more expenses are made. Percentage of expenses, and this is important especially during budget time, is our largest expenditure is personnel. So any impacts in our personnel budget are the biggest impacts to our budget. They're the greatest things that affect us from a budgetary standpoint, followed by our capital contingency at 13%. And operations and managerial are kind of tied there at the 6%. Following up on our fund balance talk, because we haven't talked about this enough today, is you can see the direct correlation of that growth and or that surplus that we're realizing right now at this current time, and the growth that Jay mentioned year over year. And you'll see last year at this time we were at 5.6 million roughly, and this year we're at 6.8 million in cash. So overall, our cash levels are increasing, but I want to make sure we're not using that cash to to balance our budget in future years. So kind of balance out the need to replace capital while also being cognizant of the need to reduce the impact of the levy. So start to balance that a little bit more. So unless there's any questions, down and dirty December financial report. 'Cause I don't think we've talked enough about finances today.
All right. Thanks, Gabe. Any discussion or questions? Make a motion to approve financial report as submitted.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor?
I,
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Gabe.
My turn?
Rapid fire chief's report.
All right, rapid fire. Just it's end of the year. The only thing I just want to really highlight here as we go through the end of the year is end of the year numbers. I'm trying to pull it up here with 30. I can't. 80 calls under. No, 80 calls under. Sorry, it's coming into focus here. Everything's tracked wherever it tracked and did what it did. I did notice that we do have less rescue and EMS calls, and so I asked Division Chief Mazulis if he had any insight as how it related to the CIP program, if there's any either data or anecdotal information as it relates to the CIP having impact, and you can give a short answer or your own answer.
Right. I don't know if we had any impact on this year's numbers, but anecdotally, like you said, I can, we've had one individual in 14 months, we transported 46 times, or an average of three per month. And after initiating a relationship with the patient with our CIP program, it's less than once a month. So I mean that's, but you can't track that. There's too many variables. But anecdotally, it seemed to see some success. Another indication is a lot of folks end of life get on hospice, and more than not, when a family member gets to the point of end of life, they call 911 because that's what you do when somebody's passed or they're very sick. And we've had a couple instances where we've assisted folks navigating the hospice system, and when their family members did pass, they did what they're supposed to and called hospice and initiated aftercare that way. And that you can't track. We have a hard enough time tracking the stats of the stuff we do, and you can't track the stuff you don't do. But anecdotally and from feedback from Kim Moore, who the Verde Valley ambulance companies get a lot more referrals and patients into the system than Sedona, but we're seeing success and results, and we're making some changes, but I'll save the rest of that for next month. Thank you.
So I think we're seeing some of those declines. You saw definitely a decline, a significant decline in interfacility transports. We saw an increase in fires, nearly doubled. I don't know, John, if you have any stats. We had a large fire, so our fire loss has got to be more than double.
2015, our fire loss was just under 300,000. In 2016, it was 4.2 million. 3.6 million of that was one fire, though.
So we doubled the number of fires, and again, I don't think we had that many more fires. A lot of these things are small onesie and twosie type, little things. But there was the way it gets coded, we did see a double there, and the rest kind of balances out in its own way. Just the average response time, as you see, is a 4-second increase with 100 more calls, but 80, 90 more calls. So I only attribute that increase to we have traffic, and I also, it's again without having a study done, if you will, but having that many more calls and having the traffic that we've endured and seen over the last year, that's probably almost we're doing better. You know what I mean? It's so, but even though the number shows us doing worse, if that makes sense. Did some backcountry rescues there. We did 4 backcountry rescues compared to 5 at the same time period last year. So continue to be busy in the backcountry anyway. Either way, we did have a fire on December 31st about 4 o'clock. We had a golf cart catch on fire. Luckily, the homeowner was alerted early, and I was able to get most of it out with a garden hose out there in the VOC. Just be aware if you got a golf cart as it relates to charging your golf cart. Good enough? Okay. Grants, we do have some grants out there. We're waiting to hear on a couple, 3 that we submitted. We have one that we're hoping that thought we would have heard by now, but we apparently have not on the hazmat tools. So we'll wait and see. We did get kind of a call saying it looks like we're going to get that, but until we get the official call. incidents by station and counts are all there. You see that, so 345 for the month. Some donations that occurred there. Community risk management, of course, we'll talk about it. Gary retired in January, but Gary retiring here and bringing a John on board. So we're seeing some new changeovers in the community risk management, and we'll continue to work at that. And John, do you have anything to add on that specific?
No, just kind of right in the middle of the transition now. I'm sure over the next few months there'll be a lot more to come, and hopefully, Gary left us in a great place, just trying to streamline a few things and do things more efficiently.
So looking at leveraging some technology, things like that we're kind of half in place that are really trying to just fully implement. We're excited to announce that John will be taking over officially as the fire marshal on February 11th. So we'll be making that move as we go forward, and I think that was a appreciated thing. So, and we're happy to have him. He's really doing very well, so we're excited. I'm not just saying that because you're here. He's doing great. Training-wise, got a lot of stuff going on. You read that, the training report, that I'm going to just forego that at this point, other than we do have Andrew Johnson, who completed his engineer's task book, and Kai Kinchlow, who also completed his engineer's task book. So that's just good stuff. Our folks are really working hard to get ready for promotions and things like that. So exciting times. We've got an engineer promotion or test coming up, and so that's what folks are ramping up for. And that's great stuff there. In there, you also see we started our executive coaching stuff with Arbinger. So we've been meeting on phone conferences. We met every week for 4 weeks, and then we've started our every other week teleconference stuff, and it's been very beneficial to the staff, command staff folks that are on those. There's 10 of us on those calls, and it's going well. And as Battalion Chief Coyle mentioned on his way out the door, they actually did their first Arbinger class for one of the shifts. So they did their first class yesterday with 25 people in it or so, and John sat through that. It went very well, and a lot of good thoughts and things there. So good stuff there. As it relates to the thank yous, you see them there. Good stuff. Just saying thanks for all the good things we do. Main Street, putting up the tree, which we help with every year. And then there's another one that's not coming up here on my computer. So there's another thank you in there, and that's got pictures on it, and it's from somewhere. I'm just not remembering where it's from.
Toys for Tots.
Toys for Tots, yes, Toys for Tots. We engaged with Toys for Tots this year, and they were very appreciative of our support. Some of you as well helped to donate, so thank you for that. On my report agenda here, couple of just upcoming activities and things like that. Cottonwood Public Safety, anything you want to report on that, Pi?
There's a new IT director at the City of Cottonwood, John Carter, and we had a great meeting yesterday with Bob Motes and myself discussing all the outstanding projects and programs in play, including our MDT deployment project. And initial conversations had leaned towards a costing structure for us to implement on their CAD. Mr. Carter is working hard to make sure that as they move forward in their CAD implementation, that they use us as their alpha beta test site to get it going, because they know Cottonwood Fire and Verde Valley and potentially Copper Canyon will be coming on with their MDT program. So he's suggesting that he won't be charging us to do so. And that's a part of that whole regional concept that he brings to the position. And their police chief is aligning with that as well, who's charged with that CAD system. As of July 1st, that whole CAD and communications piece moves from PD to IT, with the exception of personnel management of the dispatch center. And that will enhance our relationships even better, to have the techie folks be able to talk tech stuff and move forward on a lot of good programs. There is discussion and dialogue on partnering with their Update CAD platform, their operating systems and hardware. And what that does, it gets them out of being the sole owner to a more partner-aligned approach, which buys us more leverage into the relationship. So those are some of the dialogues occurring today. All good stuff.
We are due for the IGA. It's been, we'll be coming up on the IGA terms, so they're beginning to get ready to send us those terms. We'll see where those are at as well, and they're certainly experiencing the cost of running a dispatch center. I'll just say that. The realization that we know very well. So we'll
When does that come up?
July. It expires in June. And so it'd start again in July, but we should be seeing something soon. I don't know if there's a deadline. They're supposed to let us know, but soon. We talked about it at the Chiefs meeting, and so we're engaging in that. So
That's great. It's good news. It sounds like our MDTs might come up sooner than first projected, like summer solstice, I think you said, or something.
I'm going to still lean towards summer solstice.
Okay.
If it comes sooner, hallelujah.
hallelujah. Workers' compensation pool. I want to inform you that we met in Laughlin. We had board member Soto sit in on the board meeting, who happened to stop by. We're still in the investigation phase, if you will, but in order to really get to where we need to be, they needed to create an entity of which the risk pool could function, and so they needed some folks to sit as the president, the secretary and treasurer, and the Ashton Tiffany asked some folks that have been engaged, myself being one of them, to sit in on that process. So I'm currently the secretary of the workers' comp special districts workers' compensation pool, I think is what it's called. We had a great presentation put on by the president of the pool, Dave Tharp from Central Arizona. Had a packed house with lots of people in the meeting. It looks like it's going to be a go. I think we've got almost the critical mass needed to get this off the ground. And the key part of the pool, and we'll do another presentation, but the key part of the pool, really want us to let you know that I'm sitting on that board currently. I believe, Tim, you have some experience sitting on the APEP board, which is the similar group, and so you got some experience into that realm as well. But the whole point is we're trying to level out our workers' comp experience versus having these ups and downs like we've experienced now. And the pool's designed to smooth that out and create a much better process. Same coverages that they do currently with our carrier with Copper Point. But I also would suspect we'll get some really neat rates coming through because they're not going to want to lose us. And we need to be focused really on that long-term sustainability piece. So that's coming up, and we're doing some good work in there. Firefighter testing and status update.
Yes, thank you. So we are in process, as you know, of recruiting folks for the firefighter position for the eligibility list. We had 44 that we invited to sent in credentials, but a few of them, their credentials were incomplete. So we have 40 now on the list who will come to testing on February 16th and 17th for the practicals and oral boards. And of those 40, just briefly, 7 have at least an associate's degree, 8 more have at least a bachelor's degree. 7 are already paramedics, and 6 of those folks are veterans. So we've got a very good mix of folks ready to go to come in and be tested in the middle of February. Also in the telecom position, we've had 55 resumes. No one has quite met the bar of the minimum qualifications, but as we receive those, we're sending them over to Bob and to Chief Pye so that they have a look at those folks.
Is that the 16th and 17th, you said?
February 16th and 17th. Half of the gang will come in on one day for practicals, next day for oral boards, the other half just the opposite. Just want to remind everybody about the annual banquet. That's a week from this Saturday. I know one of you who's going to be speaking at that has RSVP'd. If any of the rest of you need to RSVP, just let me know, and we'll get you on the list. There's room. This is good. It's casino night. We'll load you up with money. You come play the games, and then we'll have an auction afterwards for the money that you have earned so that you can buy prizes. So it'll be a lot of fun on January 28th.
To be clear, this is Betty Bucks you're loading them up with, correct?
Well, and Chief Bucks and other Bucks, Ed Bucks and all that, yeah. I also want to thank everybody for your voting. We have a good list of winners, and those trophies are being put together right now, and we're encouraging the winners to show up. So we're not telling them they're winners, but we're saying please plan to come. Any questions about the
good group.
recruitment?
Now, RSVP, are you saying just to attend? Because I did that months ago, it felt like.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
okay.
good. 2?
Got you down.
With 2.
Good.
2.
good, I'll make sure. 2? You're coming? Good, that's
Do I
5?
hear, I gotta practice.
2 more?
Do I hear 2 more?
Two,
Do I hear
two?
2 more? How about 2 more? Do I have 2 more? Not sure yet,
I
not
got
sure
you.
yet. How about you?
I got you. 12?
12 people. Are kids invited?
No.
She was quick on that.
Who are the 12? Are you teasing?
He's kidding.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Betty.
2, 2, 2, and 1, 7 more. Put us over 60.
All right.
Thank you.
AFTA conference, it was a good conference. We had some good classes, good attendance, had over 450 people there. 2 board members were there. Any comments or questions on AFTA that you'd like to bring?
Very informative.
I'd like to just point out a couple other things. As I mentioned, workers' comp pool. I've been serving since I arrived here. I think the way we do it here is when you don't show up at a meeting or leave early, in my case, they then made me the vice president of the Verde Valley Fire Chiefs Association 5 years ago. They then took a little time, and I actually put my name in the hat, and I'm now the president of the Verde Valley Fire Chiefs Association. Terry Keller's my vice president, and then Nazay Hazime is the treasurer, and Mike Kirkendall's the secretary. But anyway, so I've stepped up into that role as well, and we've had some really productive meetings down there, so it's exciting stuff to see that happening. And then the last thing I think I have here is just a cool thing we're doing for Valentine's Day, since we won't see you beforehand. If any of you need to order flowers, we're partnering the Sedona Verde Valley Firefighters Charity and Mountain High Flowers are going to be having off-duty firefighters deliver flowers on Valentine's Day, and part of that program, as we're spreading the love, we'll be providing a heart-healthy safety message to all the people that we deliver the cards to, or the flowers to, rather. Create our safety message, and as it relates to Valentine's Day, right? But also then the Mountain High Flowers will be making a donation to our emergency relief fund, which is the group that, part of the charities that actually, when people have fires, they help provide some stays, hotel stays, some food stuffs, and toiletries and things like that, to have some ability to get through the initial shock of an incident such as a fire that displaces them. So we're partnering there, and it's going to be cool, and encourage you to think about flowers just because. Can't hurt. So with that, I think that's my chief's report, unless you have any other questions, as fast as I could go.
All right. Okay, thanks, Chief. APS utilities easement.
Board, if you recall last month, I brought this to you. We didn't have enough information. I got a simple phone call back the next day after our board meeting, a great phone call from APS. They said, hey, listen, we've got this thing called a blanket easement on your property. As you saw in your packet, it's from 1946. So back in 1946, there was just a bare land, and the way they used to do it was APS would say, hey, we're going to run some electric on your property, whoever the provider was at the time even. And they said, we'll run some property, and we can't tell you where it's going to be, so they provide these blanket easements. They've run the property, run the power, and they're eons ago. It's on this side of the property. They just realize that sometimes what happens is you go to sell your property, not that we're looking to sell, but it becomes a problem because you've got this easement across the whole parcel, right? And there's a building on it. So this is kind of a cleanup thing. It's where the power is already. They had a ground fault going on, and they were going to make the repair. That's when they realized the easement was old and they wanted to update it. So I recommend we go forward with that easement as presented. They will provide us with a new easement and the language and stuff when it's completed, and they do this all the time when they find them. So I don't think there's any headache or angst on this.
Okay.
As before, much different than the last time they were asking for a new easement, if you will.
I talked to Bill before the meeting. He didn't indicate there was any issue. Did he tell you any differently?
He left. I mean, no, yeah, he said there is not. I talked to him multiple times after this incident, and he's comfortable and good.
Okay. Any questions or discussion? All right.
Do we need to make a motion on
Yep.
this to approve it, or?
Yep.
I'll go ahead and make it if you'd like.
Okay.
I move to approve the APS easement request dated December 2nd, 2016.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item.
Merit Technology, Jeff?
Mr. Chairman and board members, the item you have before you is replacing no longer supported equipment, technology equipment. It's through a competitive bid process. Mr. Moats has 3 bids attached. The best one was with Merit Technologies for $17,578. And those are for the switching systems for all of the technology that runs our internet and phone systems.
Budgeted item.
Budgeted item.
Be important to note, I guess, that if we were to purchase this new cost is kind of a little shocking.
Yeah, so Bob is the master dealer, deal maker, and so it's about 4 times the amount if you go with brand new equipment. He found these items elsewhere through Merit, and it's still supported equipment for a time certain, and this is the best number that he came up with to get the same warranties a whole bit. It's supported.
So it's all refurbished, reconditioned, or just slightly used, or what have you?
It's reconditioned and updated and tested and supported and warranted.
So we'll go back to kind of the stuff we're talking about. We're working every day to try to do our best with everything we got and things like that, and do what we can do. So committed.
Discussion or a motion?
I move to approve purchase order 10686 in the amount of $17,578.01 to Merit Technology Partners for data network switching equipment.
Second?
Okay, there's a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Yeah, I think we can give thanks though to Bob with it.
You got it.
Good cost savings.
All right, so we've done the drone.
Done the drone.
All right.
Serious accident investigation. I'll give it to Chief Pachera.
So the report was finally completed in January, first week. It was reviewed by myself as well as our former fire marshal for completeness. And I think the report speaks for itself relative to the chain of events that occurred, to the human error moment when our fire captain sustained significant injuries. Since that time, we've taken the lessons learned moment recommendations and began not only the day afterwards inspecting all of the facilities and barbecue systems, but also incorporating plans for automatic shutoffs, the fuel sources, creating a standard operating procedures for maintenance and care of those items, and planning for any moves at Station 5 relative to the cooking systems, sprinkler systems, the whole bit relative to that rehab of that facility as we get ready to move back in. What's also aligned with this is annual inspections by our fire prevention division of all of our facilities to make sure we're compliant with any hazards and alike that we hadn't in the past, but now we are doing. So, unfortunate event, and what I'd like to state is that not very many fire departments or agencies have the will to take a critical look at themselves and create a public document to state such of any errors that that any agency has had. Most generally bury it, hide it, or slide it to the side and hope people forget. And I want to thank the chief to make sure that we got it right, and we reported the facts as they were stated and made it public for full disclosure.
And certainly Battalion Chief Coyle for taking that on and providing that very forward look and objective look to the process and engaging in such a robust document as well, not just pencil whipped. And yeah, we looked really hard, but you know, it's complete. I can tell you I'm really sensitive to the fire stations on fire, and I can't tell you how many fire stations have caught fire since our incident in October. Just yesterday or the day before in I think it's Orange County, California, fully involved, complete loss. Lost a ladder truck. So I mean, the realities are that it's not an isolated incident. We're not the lone soldiers in this situation, and anyway, it makes the company makes you feel better, but we're not the only ones, and so it does happen. We're as guilty or prone to that happen for us as well. So,
As a, so the report has been submitted to all the interested parties, state OSHA, our insurance, and our workers' comp pool. And state OSHA is reviewing the report. We will most likely hear from them on any recommendations that they may have for us or any actions that they may have. And it's on their schedule that if we hear from them, we'll bring to you and let you know what they've provided.
Chief, I'm
how's-
somewhat, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay, I'm somewhat familiar with annual OSHA inspections of fire facilities. Is that something we do also here?
we do a workers' comp inspection more than an OSHA inspection, so we're talking the same thing. It's similar, but not done by OSHA.
Well, it's more like a safety, it's more like a safety inspection of the station required by OSHA. Is that what we do?
In Arizona, it's not required.
Okay.
But we are doing a occupancy life safety inspection. And we also have our facilities battalion chief, Lukowski, who aligns with those elements of not only repairs, maintenance, but also hazards. State OSHA will come in and do audits for us on request. They generally don't do it on an annual basis, but it's only for periodic checks that we request, or if they have complaints.
I had an opportunity to visit the station and take a look, and it looks outstanding as far as all the repairs that are being done. And I can only assume that once everything's complete, a barbecue will go back in its place and resume as business as usual. But is that the game plan, or is it gonna be moved somewhere else? Or I noticed there was a sprinkler head gonna be up in the area where there previously wasn't one.
So our fire prevention division, our CRM, will be working with our station and operational group to make sure that that when a barbecue is reinstalled, it's installed in an appropriate location. And done so by code and in conformance with the fire marshal's desires. But yes, there will be a barbecue back there. It won't necessarily be in the same place.
Gotcha.
And again, as I stated, the workers' comp through Copper Point, they come out on an annual or whatever basis that it is, but they do a safety walkthrough as well with their safety specialist. We had a meeting, and we have another meeting coming up in March. So we're working with our loss control folks on a fairly regular basis as well, whether it's walking buildings and whether it's, and they, make suggestions or things like that as well.
And then lastly, I feel it's appropriate to ask on an update of our injured firefighter, our injured captain.
So he's back to work light duty, started this week.
You did.
We've assigned him the duty of accreditation manager, and so he's beginning that process to take a look at how we can take our organization forward. He did accreditation work years ago, and it kind of got shelved, and so he's very familiar with it. Needs to dust the rust off a little bit, but he's pretty excited. I've not actually had a chance. He was here yesterday. I've not had a chance to actually spend much time talking to him as the meeting schedule has been a little robust. I'm just getting going here, folks. So, anything else that Jeff or Betty would like to add to that?
He looked really good, he felt in good condition, he's back 2 days a week, and that will just increase over time. He's got a lot of doctor's appointments still, but he was incredibly experienced.
Expectation is he'll return to full duty.
He's hoping so. We'll see how life goes.
Okay.
I failed to mention, just under my chief's report as a safety message here, big storm coming. I think someone put this on my desk here, but there's a big storm coming. I think there's 2 or 3 storms that are lining up, so pay attention to your weather the next couple of days, please. Be safe, drive safe, and I forgot that, so.
All right. Dave, shared services?
Shared services, as of our last board meeting, we have not had a scheduled shared services committee meeting. That's not to say that the chiefs have not met informally, and so to that extent, I'd probably refer to the chief if anything has come up.
We had dialogue back to the chiefs meeting that I spoke to. We talked about shared services. We're talking about when we want to have another meeting again. it's out there or disband if we're not gonna have meetings, cause we don't need to continue to ask these questions. There definitely is a strong interest to continue shared service concepts and create those opportunities for us. But we're just, I think they're still getting their stuff together, you know, on everyone that's either merged or consolidated or JPA'd down that way, and they're just trying to get their bearings straight. They've got a couple shared reserves going on down in Verde Valley and Copper Canyon, so that's working out well for them. And so there's things that are happening. It's just Sedona hasn't been at the table at this point quite yet, but you know, to me, I've been focusing some efforts on this risk workers' comp pool, which to me is like a shared service concept. So, you know, we're doing our mayor EMS billing thing. We're keeping it going.
Okay. And finally, a star is born. The new holder of the fire marshal safety message.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board. Excuse me, I'm coming down with a cold, so I'm a little hoarse. But, you know, every January and July, I walk through my house, test the smoke detectors, and check my fire extinguishers. And seeing how I just moved into a new house, as I was thinking about this the other day, I thought, well, I know the smoke detectors are new. I just put them up. In fact, they were combination smoke detector and CO detectors. And then I remembered I'm in a new house. I don't have any fire extinguishers yet. So that's high on my priority list this weekend, is to go buy my 2 fire extinguishers and mount them in the house. But what I wanted to talk about with smoke detectors is, like I said, every January and July, that's when I test mine. They recommend now that smoke detectors should be replaced after 10 years. If you don't know when they went up or they are more than 10 years old, it's time to replace them. If you're unsure, you can pull them off the wall, and there's a date of manufacture stamped on the back. It'll have the month and the year. So if that date of manufacture is more than 10 years, get rid of them. The sensor is probably degraded to the point where it's not adequate, and go spend a couple bucks and replace smoke detectors. That's all I have.
John, I have a question.
Yes.
What about if you have smoke detectors that are hooked up to the alarm system?
They, the smoke detectors that are hooked up to the alarm system, still the sensors wear out and should be replaced. What you'll want to do, though, is some of those connectors may be a little different than others. The best thing to do is take your detector down off the wall and take it with you to Home Depot or wherever you decide to shop, and make sure that the one you buy has the same connector so that you can hook the new one in.
Otherwise, you gotta rewire.
Yeah, and I think they make adapters, but you know, if you just take it into Home Depot and say, hey, I'm looking for one of these, they can, any hardware store can send you in the right direction and find you the one that works. And most of them, if they don't carry them, they can order them for you, so.
All right. Chief, you got an extended agenda you want to continue, or?
No, I gotta buy this guy dinner.
But wait, I'm not done. Oh.
Brian has been here.
Any longer, it'll be breakfast.
All right, everybody, thank you for a long day. We're adjourned.
Yeah, by the way, we gotta sing happy birthday to birthday boy. Is that true? Is this true that there's a birthday boy in the house, or is this actual fact? I know.
We better let him go.
There's a bunch of cookies. I think that's how it works, right?
Thanks, Ty.
All right, everybody, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.